Chapter 933. Thump, thump, thump. The already broken wooden door, under the external force, made a rhythmic tremble, dust rustling down. After a long time, the sound of footsteps came from the courtyard. The footsteps were very slow, stopping and pausing, indicating that the owner of the footsteps was walking very slowly. After a long time, an old voice came from the other side of the door. "Who is it?" "It's me." A rough voice came from outside the door. "You are De Zhuang from the east side of the village?" "Yes, I am De Zhuang." Old Man Liu, quickly open the door. The sound of a wooden bolt being moved came from inside. The wooden door creaked open, and an old face peeked out from inside. Seeing the unfamiliar man outside the door, the old man was startled and blurted out, "You are not De Zhuang." A trace of panic appeared on his face, and he hurriedly closed the wooden door. The big man stretched out a hand and gently pushed against the wooden door, and the wooden door could no longer close. "Sir, this is not right." The big man looked at him, shook his head and said, "It's broad daylight right now, and there are so many people in the village. There are 3 people squatting under the tree opposite, and I can't do anything to you. Even if I'm not De Zhuang, you don't have to be so panicked. Aren't you exposing yourself here?" Seeming to realize the problem with the big man's words, the expression on the old man's face regained some calmness, and he asked, "Who are you and why are you pretending to be De Zhuang?" The big man looked at him, smiled and said, "Is young Duke Qin inside?" The old man's expression changed again, and he suddenly shook his head, and immediately said, "I don't know any young Duke Qin, and I don't know what you are talking about. If you don't leave, I'll call for help." "You've exposed yourself again." The big man looked at him, and said helplessly, "Even if you don't know young Duke Qin, you can just tell me. Why are you acting so agitated, as if you're afraid that I know him, and you're closing the door and calling for help? Aren't you clearly telling me that young Duke Qin is inside?" After saying this, the old man's face was already pale and bloodless. The burly man sighed and said, "Although young Duke Qin is not a good person, he is still surnamed Qin. Even if he dies, he can't just casually die outside." Seeing the old man's face turn even paler and his body tremble uncontrollably, the large man was stunned for a moment and asked in disbelief, "He can't really be dead, right?" The old man's body trembled even more violently. A moment later, the burly man looked at the old man and said with a conflicted expression, "A dead one is fine too." Young Duke Qin of the Qin clan, who had fled to avoid punishment, had returned. However, he was carried back. When he was carried back, he had already lost all signs of life. According to the coroner's examination, the corpse's 4 limbs, no, all 5 limbs were broken. His entire body was covered in burns, and there were countless knife wounds all over his body. He was almost like a sieve. One could imagine the inhumane torture this little duke had suffered before he died. There was no way to solve this case. The body was found by a riverbank 10 li away from Jingdo. It had been soaked in the water for a long time, and had long changed beyond recognition. No clues could be found. If it were not for the jade pendant he had on him that proved his identity, the bailiffs of the Yamen would not have recognized him as young Duke Qin. The Qin family had just experienced a great change. Now they had to hold a funeral. Prime Minister Qin, the old sending off the black, could be said to be extremely tragic. When the people of Jingdo learned of this matter, they were also affected by this sorrowful atmosphere. Every household was decorated with lanterns and banquets. The atmosphere was very lively. The biggest wastrel in Jingdo would finally no longer harm people. The people no longer had to be on edge. Even some minor nobles dared to let their wives and concubines go out. Nothing could compare to this joyous event. In the Qin family, the servants wore plain mourning clothes. The 5th master of the Qin family supported Prime Minister Qin, and slowly walked into the mourning hall. After the 2 of them walked in, everyone in the mourning hall left one by one. Prime Minister Qin's expression was calm. There was no sadness or joy on his face. It was just that his originally straight back, after bending, could no longer straighten it. He supported Prime Minister Qin to sit down and said softly, "Father, your health is not good. Don't be too sad." Prime Minister Qin raised his head and looked at him. He asked, "Did you do it yourself?" Hearing this, He's body stiffened. He quickly relaxed and shook his head. No. Prime Minister Qin refused He's support and stood up from the chair. He slowly walked out of the morning hall and looked back. The eldest son of the Qin family was now lying in the coffin in the middle. He turned his head again. The once prosperous Qin family only had one son left of the 5 sons. The next generation was either affected by their fathers or brought back to their parents' home because they were too young. The Qin family now only had 2 people left. It could no longer be called a family. He wanted to look up at the sky and laugh, but he could only make a sound like a broken bellow. Haha, this old man's whole life, this whole life. Li was reading a poem. It was a poem written by Mississippi Lu. He never knew that Mississippi Lu could actually write poems. She had only started reading for a short period of time. He was afraid that she could not even recognize all the words. This jump was really too big. The second young lady of the Lu clan stood beside him and asked, "Is his handwriting ugly?" Li shook his head and said, "Not at all. If your writing is ugly, there is no good writing in the world." He said this not only because he wanted to flatter Mississippi Lu. Mississippi Lu might not be able to recognize all the words, read articles, or write poems, but she could write good writing that countless people would envy. For a master like her, if she could not even control her body, she would not dare to go out and brag about her ranking on the heaven list. What's more, her handwriting was very similar to the one she usually used. Wouldn't it be like slapping her own face if she said that her writing was bad? An imperceptible joy appeared on Mississippi Lu's face, and she asked, "Really not ugly?" Li said seriously, "Really not ugly, I swear to God." Mississippi Lu breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good. I found your old handwriting and copied it. I was still worried. It's just that the tone is wrong. There's no mood, no rhythm, and no rhyme. In terms of words, you need to think about it." Li frowned and looked at Mississippi Lu, and said, "Rui, I think you should focus on practicing your sword. If you don't believe me, look up and see who the heavens have forgiven." Li ran around the courtyard, and as he ran, he turned back to warn second young mistress Lu. "Qin has committed many evil deeds, and now he's dead. You know how tragic his death was. If you continue to treat me like this, when the day comes that my martial art surpasses yours, I promise, I will repay you 10 times, 100 times, for what you've done to me today." Mississippi Lu held autumn water, and looked at him coldly. She followed behind him at a steady pace. "I've decided to listen to your advice and practice my sword." Mississippi Lu's autumn water was out of its scabbard. Things could not be more serious. Seeing Rui standing at the door, Li quickly said, Rui, don't just look, take care of her." Rui smiled and walked into the room with Li Duan in her arms. Li looked at the sloppy old man leaning against the tree and said, "Sue, 10 chicken legs, 10 chicken legs, help me stop her." The sloppy old man raised his head and glanced at him, then looked away again, focusing his attention on the little yellow book in his hand. In the entire courtyard, there were only 2 people who were more powerful than Mississippi Lu. One didn't care about the relationship between husband and wife, and the other didn't care about the morality of the martial world. Mississippi Lu's butt would swell when her hands and feet landed on it, and when autumn water landed on it, her butt would be gone. Her butt was more important, and it was best to escape. He channeled all his true yuan to the soles of his feet, and his whole body turned into a shadow, disappearing from where he stood, heading straight for the direction of the courtyard's entrance. Bang! Chapter 934. Li was surprised himself. It wasn't like he didn't know what he was capable of, so how could he have bumped into the eldest princess? With her martial arts and alertness, no matter how sudden it was or how fast he was, it was impossible for her to not be able to dodge in time. Unless she was really too absent-minded. So absent-minded that she didn't even notice that someone had bumped into her. He naturally knew how fast he was just now. Even he felt pain when he bumped into her, not to mention the delicate eldest princess. Therefore, the first thing he did was ask her where she had bumped into. Did it hurt? Did she need him to help rub it? However, what was with the 3 inexplicable chills he felt from the front, the back, and the door? Was there anything wrong with not running away after bumping into someone and showing proper concern? Compared to those people who ran away after the accident, her personality was many times more noble. Lee looked at the eldest princess and said in a concerned voice, "I'm sorry, I ran too fast just now. Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Emingzu covered her chest with one hand and shook her head, but her brows were still slightly knitted. No wonder it felt so soft just now. Lee realized where he had bumped into and he couldn't help feeling even more worried. After several months of hard work, the eldest princess' chest finally had a bit of improvement. It could even be said that it was just beginning to take shape. If it was knocked back by this, wouldn't he be committing a great sin? Wouldn't he be ruining this girl's life? Out of a man's sense of responsibility, he had to take responsibility for her to the end. When there were outsiders around, Mississippi Lou's personality was completely put away. She didn't want others to think that she was a violent woman, especially not Emingzu. She could read and write poems. She was also skilled in both literature and martial arts, not any worse than Emingzu. When she sat down at the table, the eldest princess put her hand down from her chest. When Lee looked at her carefully, he found that she was very different from before. Although her clothes were as neat as before, and her hair was not disheveled, her complexion was much more haggard than a few days ago. She seemed to be extremely exhausted, and this exhaustion was not shown on the outside, but on the inside. In the past, when she stood next to Second Miss Liu, the only thing that she could compare to Second Miss Liu was her luxurious temperament and her equally good looks. Now her temperament was gone and her beauty was gone. Although her haggard appearance gave her a different feeling, it was a beauty that only a few people like him could appreciate. Li was really worried this time and asked, "What's wrong? Why is your face so bad?" She was not like this even during the busiest times of the imperial court. He said, "Something troubling me." Rui looked at him and asked, "It's been so long. Haven't you made a decision yet?" Li looked at her in surprise and shock. He asked, Decide what?" Rui smiled and said, "Although I don't know what my husband is hesitating about, this matter must be very important. Otherwise, my husband wouldn't have used more than 2 years, and still haven't made a decision." Rui didn't like to talk like Xiao Huan and chatter. She also wasn't like Mississippi Liu who spoke like gold. She always saw everything and remembered it. Some of Li Yi's subtle emotional changes could be hidden from Xiao Huan and Rui, but it couldn't be hidden from her. Rui leaned on his shoulder and murmured, "Is it hard to decide?" It wasn't just the eldest princess who found it hard to decide. Even Li Yi himself had never truly made up his mind. He sighed and said, "One step is the sky, one step is the earth. It's very difficult." Rui held his hand tightly and said, "No matter what happens in the future, I and Rui will accompany you to the heavens and the earth." With her words, Li didn't have anything to hesitate about. Whether it was to the heavens or the earth, he would always have Rui by his side. Mississippi Liu, forget about it. She would only beat him until he cried. Whether to advance or retreat, he decided to let Emingzu make the choice. He gently kissed Rui's face, stood up and walked towards the inner courtyard. In fact, he didn't think highly of the eldest princess in this competition. One was diligent enough to challenge him every day to improve her strength, while the other was always burdened by court affairs and neglected her martial arts. One advancing and one retreating, the gap between them quickly became apparent. Sure enough, the sound of their previous competition was bang bang bang, but now it became bang bang bang. Li passed through a moon gate and saw that the eldest princess was pressed down by Mississippi Liu. He raised his hand and quickly fell down, hitting a certain perky part of her body. That was how the sound of bang 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 came out. As he hit, he frowned and asked, "Do you submit? Do you submit? Do you submit?" Li stood still, thought for a moment and asked, "Do you need my help?" Chapter 935. Help. How do you want to help? Mississippi Liu's raised hand stopped in the air, and she looked over. The Princess Royal's acupuncture point was sealed, and her pretty face was flushed. She stared at him with a murderous look. "Rui, what are you doing?" Li walked over quickly, pulled Mississippi Liu away and said, "Emingzu is a princess. How can you treat her like this? Let go of her. Mississippi Lou was pulled away by him. The murderous look in the Princess Royal's eyes dissipated, and there was a hint of apology. It turned out that the help he was talking about was to help himself. Lee secretly wiped away a cold sweat. Although he also wanted to try what it felt like to spank the butt of a princess who might become an empress in the future, it was just for the moment. There was still a long way to go to Rui. Just thinking about it made him tremble. After the Princess Royal was helped up by him, she still couldn't move. Lee looked up and down, left and right, and asked, "Have your acupuncture points been sealed? Where was it? I'll help you unseal it." The Princess Royal's face turned red again and she didn't say anything. Mississippi Lou came over, pushed him aside, and gently touched Mingju's chest. Although she was humiliated by Mississippi Lou, she didn't do anything drastic after her acupuncture points were unsealed. She got up and walked to the hot spring room, and said lightly, "I'm going to take a bath. Get me a change of clothes." Lee followed Mississippi Lou to the front. She suddenly turned around and asked, "I'm going to get her a change of clothes, and I'm going to take a bath. Do you want to come with me?" Lee hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea." When Mississippi Lou began to roll up her sleeves, Lee waved his hand and said, "I just took a bath this morning. I don't need it this time." After that, he turned around and walked in the direction he came from. After being spanked by Mississippi Lou, the Princess Royal took a shower and changed her clothes. She looked much more energetic than before. The clothes she was wearing belonged to Mississippi Lou. They were about the same age and height. She could wear whatever Mississippi Lou could wear, but Mississippi Lou might not be able to wear what she could. Lee noticed that Mississippi Lou's gaze kept drifting towards the Princess Royal's chest, and there was some doubt in her eyes. The relationship between the two of them was really strange to the extreme. They were enemies and friends at the same time. Lee couldn't figure it out, but there was one thing he was very clear about. The two of them were indeed getting closer. With the Princess Royal's character, she could actually act as if nothing had happened after being spanked. With their habits, they would actually take a bath together with each other. This made Lee involuntarily think of Zuemo and Ruoqing. What was wrong with the women around him? Mingzi tucked a strand of hair that was still a little wet at the temples behind her head. She looked up and asked, "Have the princes sent you invitations?" Lee nodded and said, "There are quite a few." The ones who were the happiest about the King of Shu losing power were not him or the Princess Royal, but the princes who used to be below the King of Shu. In the past, the King of Shu had a respected status and had the support of the Cui family and many forces in the court. The other princes could not see any hope at all. Now that the King of Shu had fallen, wouldn't the throne be chosen from among them? Therefore, these days, the princes whose fiefdoms were close to the capital had already rushed back to the capital. Those whose fiefdoms were far away were also on their way back after receiving the news. Naturally, returning to the capital was not just to watch the show. Returning to the capital was to win over the officials and nobles, strengthen oneself, and accumulate chips for the future struggle for power. In the past few days, Lee had already received several invitations to banquets. Of course, those invitations were now either lying at the bottom of the furnace or under the carriage. He was not the only one who made such a choice. Any official with status and some knowledge in the capital would not make a move to choose a side before the situation was clear. The struggle for the throne was not a game. If one chose the wrong side, it would not only implicate oneself in the future, perhaps one's family would also be implicated. The previous wave of people who had chosen a side in advance had already died. Not only did they have to think for the country, but they also had to think for themselves. Lee also had to think for himself. Think for Rui, think for Xiaohuan, think for Zumo, think for Ruoqing, think for many people. It was also a sin to be too outstanding. With the old emperor's protection, he had nothing to fear. Once the old emperor could not protect him, those so-called princes and princes, who called him brothers now, would after a while be righteous and raise the butcher's knife against their brothers. Mingzi knew him very well. After being together for so long, she knew better than him who was who and what people would do. If there was really a day when Mingzi faced him with a sword, then there would be nothing in this capital, this Jing kingdom, that was worth his nostalgia. Mingzi looked at him and said, "Burn it." What? Lee looked at her. And Mississippi Lou also looked at her. Burn all those invitations, the eldest princess said in a low voice. The eldest princess said in a low voice. Then she looked up at him and said seriously, I've decided. Mississippi Lou looked at her and asked, What have you decided? Lee didn't ask because he knew what she had decided. He was a little curious and a little surprised. This question was actually what he was going to ask her. Before he asked, she had already given the answer. He looked at her face and asked seriously, Have you really decided? Her expression was equally serious. I have decided. No regrets. No regrets. Lee knew where the knot in her heart was. It was also the knot in his heart. If she couldn't get over it, she would never be able to make up her mind. That step was so difficult that the two of them had taken it for 2 years, but they still hadn't crossed it. What exactly happened that made her make such a decision in just a few days? Thoughts flew in his mind. After a moment he nodded, got up and said, It's good that you have decided. I will send you back. Emingzu stood up and nodded. Mississippi Lou looked at them. She felt that although the three of them were sitting very close, she was so far away from them. She couldn't understand what they were saying, couldn't understand what they were doing. She felt that she was the outsider. Li sent the eldest princess out the door before turning his head. He looked at her and said, That day in the celestial prison, what Cui Qingming said, did you hear it all? She didn't deny it, which meant she admitted it. Li looked at her and sighed. He said, Actually, you don't have to be like this. I really don't care. In the past, it was always you who did it for me. She stopped walking and looked at him. Now, it's my turn to do it for you. The eldest princess, who had always walked the smart and capable path, suddenly began to be emotional. Li was stunned and couldn't get used to it for a moment. That. Li looked at her and thought for a moment. He said, Even if you really want to do something, you have to tell me first. Don't let your imagination run wild. Look at how haggard you look these few days. The eldest princess shook her head and said, It's all right. I can still hold on. It's not a matter of whether you can hold on or not. Li shook his head and said seriously, In the past, when you and Rui stood together, you were evenly matched. Now she has taken 70% of the advantage. You only have 30% left. When Li Mingzhu heard that, she was taken aback for a moment before she gave a faint smile. She turned around and attentively helped him adjust his collar. She asked, Do you know why Lu Rui always likes to beat you up? Why? Li Yi immediately became spirited and asked curiously. This was something he had been puzzled about for a long time. He couldn't understand why the violent and savage Mississippi Lu didn't beat others but always beat him. In the end, he could only attribute it to the whole family. She couldn't beat Rui, and beating Xiaohuan would seem like bullying the weak. She could only bully him to get a little bit of psychological satisfaction. Emingzu helped him fix his collar. Then she clenched her fist again and said, Because I also like. Chapter 936. If she liked him, then she liked him. If she liked him, then she should say it out loud. He would decide whether or not to accept her based on her performance in the future. She grabbed his collar just because she liked him. He almost suffocated to death. What kind of like was that? His collar was grabbed by her. When Li Yi walked back, he tidied his collar and ordered the gatekeeper, Send an invitation to all the manners who sent the invitation. Tell them that I'm sick and can't go. If you don't want to go, then don't go. Telling others that you're not going was basic etiquette. He straightened his collar and tidied his clothes before walking into the courtyard. Otherwise, Mississippi Lu might think that he did something else when he sent Emingzi back. He didn't mind, but what about Her Royal Highness's reputation? To Li Yi's surprise, Mississippi Lu wasn't in the courtyard. Wasn't she curious about Mingzhu's decision just now? It wasn't Mississippi Lu's style to not ask if she didn't know, especially when it came to matters related to Emingzu. So he planned to tell her personally. When she asked, he didn't say anything. When she didn't ask, he took the initiative to run over. Li thought for a while, and felt that his behavior was a little cheap. So be it. He was used to being cheap anyway. She didn't ask. If he still didn't explain, with her narrow-mindedness, he didn't know what she would think in her heart. Rui and he were telepathic. She had already guessed it. They didn't need to make it clear, and they didn't need to. Mississippi Lou was different. If he let her guess blindly, she could probably make up a wonderful New Year drama. He walked to the door of Mississippi Lou's room, knocked on the door and walked in. Many experiences and lessons showed that it was best not to enter a girl's room without knocking. It was not a good habit to not knock on the door. The frequency of accidentally seeing a girl bathing and changing her clothes was far too high. Even Li Yi suspected that he had some sort of lucky halo on him. It's not good to see indecent things. It's even worse if you don't take responsibility for what you see. Drunk Mo has already taken responsibility, and Ruoqing hasn't. Mississippi Lou, we're a family, so don't be so distant. Mississippi Lou was reading in the room. Li Yi walked over and sat down opposite her. He poured himself a cup of tea and asked tentatively, "Don't you have anything to ask me?" "No," Mississippi Lou replied without raising her head. Li Yi asked again, "Aren't you curious about Mingzhu's decision?" Mississippi Lou replied calmly without raising her head, "I'm not curious." Li Yi stood up, took the book away from her hand, and raised her head to make her look forward. Finally, he sat down opposite her and said, "You're not curious, but I want to say." Mississippi Lou finally stopped being arrogant and looked at him calmly. Li Yi sighed first, and a trace of sadness appeared on his face. He said, "His Majesty, I'm afraid he doesn't have many days left. You know, there's no hope for the King of Shu now. There's an undercurrent in the capital now. All the princes are returning to the capital with the excuse of visiting His Majesty, but they're secretly trying to fight for the throne." Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, "Does this have anything to do with us?" "Why not?" Li Yi looked at her, knocked on the table and said, "You're the leader of the Lu League. You have so many martial arts masters, officials and nobles under your command. You can tie them up and beat them whenever you want. If you're angry, the entire capital will shake 3 times. Don't doubt that you have such power now." Mississippi Lou continued to listen to him. "Only His Majesty can allow such a force to exist near the capital, because he knows that we won't use this force to do anything to harm the court. But now that the new emperor has changed, will he still trust us like the current His Majesty does? Moreover, you also know that in the current court, our family has already achieved a little bit of success. When the time comes, it will definitely attract the new emperor's suspicion. Maybe it will be used to establish power." Li Yi felt that he needed to explain the stakes in this matter to Mississippi Lou. She had already grown up, and she needed to learn about other things. Mississippi Lou nodded, then looked at him and asked, "What did she feed you just now? I even heard her say that she likes you." "There are some things you can't just listen to," Li Yi said with a headache. "Do you understand what I just said? Do you understand the current situation of our family? Let's go tie up those princes." Mississippi Lou's method was always so simple and direct. Violence is a way to solve problems, but it's not the only way. Li Yi looked at her and said solemnly, "You have to remember, you are a scholar now. A scholar can't always fight and kill." Mississippi Lou nodded and said, "So what did she feed you just now?" "She didn't feed me anything." Li Yi rubbed between his brows, stood up, and pressed down on her shoulder. He said, "We now have 2 paths. The first is to have someone who won't suspect us and won't doubt us become the emperor. And we will continue to stay in the capital. The second is to pack up now. We won't stay in the capital anymore. We'll abandon all the brothels, all the shops, all the properties. We'll take Rui Xiaohuan and Emingzu and find a place to occupy the mountain and become king. I choose the second path." Mississippi Lou said without hesitation, looking a little eager to try. Then she seemed to realize something and asked, "Why do we have to take Emingzu with us? Why did they have to take the eldest princess?" Naturally, it was because she was in the same situation as him, or even more dangerous than him. Chapter 937. It seems that you are really crazy. After touching her forehead and checking her pulse, and ruling out the possibility of fever and qigong deviation, Mississippi Lou said with absolute certainty. She no longer cared about Mingzhu's gaze. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, looked at him and asked, In the martial arts world, martial arts are respected, regardless of gender or age. The emperor is different. Since ancient times, has any woman ever been the emperor? What she said was wrong. There were too many women who had been the emperor, too many to mention. Let's not talk about the distant ones, let's just talk about. Mississippi Lou's question was off topic. It was not the point they were talking about at all. Lee looked at her and asked, "There is a first time for everything. Before you, has there been a woman who has been the chief of Wulin?" Before Mississippi Lou, there had not even been a chief of Wulin, let alone a woman who had been the chief of Wulin. Why couldn't there be a female emperor? Emingzu is different from other princes and princesses. She has a very high prestige in the court. After the fall of the Chui family, all the civil and military officials in the court are very convinced of her. In the hearts of the people, in the eyes of the scholars, no one can compare to her. If she was a man, I'm afraid she would have been sitting on that throne long ago. This kind of unprecedented thing was suddenly brought up. Of course, it was hard to accept. Fortunately, under his subtle influence over the years, Mississippi Lou's ability to accept new things was very strong. Her eyes showed a look of understanding, which made Lee very happy. Mississippi Lou looked up at him and asked, "If Emingzu becomes the emperor, can't she get married?" Lee nodded. He had seen the emperor, but who had the ability to marry the emperor? Mississippi Lou asked again. "Then she can't build a harem?" "What are you thinking about? Emingzu isn't that kind of person." Lee knocked her head with his finger. After he realized it was Mississippi Lou in front of him, not Xiao Huan or Lolita. Half of his buttocks left the chair, ready to escape at any time. Surprisingly, Mississippi Lou didn't seem to care about his unreasonable behavior. She held Autumn water and said, "Okay, since you want to help her, then help her." Although Mississippi Lou was usually a little unruly and headstrong, she was still very reasonable at critical moments. Lee was very pleased. Then he thought of something and looked at her and asked, "Just now, you said that the way Emingzu looked at me was strange. What's wrong?" "Nothing." Mississippi Lou's tone was very unfriendly. She glared at him fiercely and turned around to return to her room. Being stared at for no reason, Lee felt a little wronged. But if she liked to stare at him, then so be it. Anyway, she looked pretty good when she stared at him. Seeing that there was only half a year left until the new year, the next few days would be very busy. The old generals had to go from house to house to get closer to each other. Otherwise, the next time they went to court, there would be no pillar to sleep on. Other important officials in the court also had to find opportunities to contact them. In addition, the royal family had lost face this time. They had to think of a way to regain some of the face they had lost to the king of Shu. Emingzu was the pride of the royal family, and also the most suitable candidate. The brothel had to come up with some new dramas and stories to praise her achievements. There was no need to exaggerate how good the princess royal was. The people had their own scale, changing the marriage law, opening a medical center, opening a school, managing the court. She was simply a role model for a good princess in the new era, a role model for future generations. There was no other in the world. The warm autumn sun hung high in the sky. The weather was rare. A clean white cloth was spread on the grass. In 2 months, the two little guys would be 1 year old. Now was the time for them to move around more. They crawled around on the white cloth. Xiao Huan and the maid named Yenji from the prince's mansion watched them from the grass. Rui and the prince's concubine were on a boat on the lake. The proud Lolita held her arm to accompany them. It was too far away to hear what they were talking about. Li sat in the pavilion in the middle of the lake and ate a grape. He asked casually, "I heard that a few more princes have returned to the capital?" 3. Li Xian nodded and said, "However, it's useless for them to return to the capital. Even if there's a fight for the crown prince, it won't be their turn." Li Xian shook his head and said, "They might as well learn from the others and stay in their feudal lands obediently. Right now, it's easy to enter the capital but hard to leave." Li Xian's words were not without reason. Everyone knew what the princes who had returned to the capital at this time were thinking. However, there was only one position. If they managed to get it, they would transform from a flood dragon to a dragon. If they failed to get it, they could only be a snake, and there was a high chance that they would end up as a dead snake. It was better for those princes who knew that they had no hope of getting the throne and stayed in their feudal lands obediently. It was better to be an idle prince who stood aloof from worldly affairs than to lose their lives. There are 6 adult princes who have stayed in the capital. Prince Qi and Prince Xian are the 2 with the most backing. Of course, they still can't be compared to the king of Shu in the past. However, now that the Cui clan has fallen, there's no hope for the king of Shu. On the surface, it seems that they have the highest chance of getting the throne. Note, the title Prince Qi was something I randomly came up with back then. I didn't take the Qi kingdom into consideration, and there's no other meaning to it. It's useless to dwell on these meaningless things. Let's just treat it as an ordinary title. Li Yi threw the grape skin into the lake, and fish immediately swam over. He then asked, "These princes probably won't be able to stay idle for the time being, right? How can they possibly stay idle?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "They're busy visiting the officials of the imperial court, sending gifts everywhere, forming cliques and seizing power." He suddenly looked at Li Yi and asked, "What should we do now? If you and Emingzu have made any decisions, don't hide it from me again." Li Yi looked at him and said, "Don't you know how to read lips? There's no need for us to tell you to know what we're talking about. Who can hide it from you? You don't have to mock me." Li Xian shook his head and said, "At that time, I wasn't good enough. But it's different now. As long as I'm not too far away and can't see clearly, I can almost guess what you're talking about. Moreover," he changed his tone and said, "even if I don't look, I can guess what Emingzu will choose in the end." Li Xian said with certainty, "For her and for you, she will definitely do it." "You guessed it?" Li looked at him in surprise. It was said that a scholar who had been away for 3 days would be looked at in a new light. Li Xian had suddenly become smart, and it was really hard for him to get used to it. "Of course. I didn't guess it." Li Xian shook his head and said, "A few days ago, Brother Shen said that if the new emperor ascends to the throne, you and Emingzu will be in danger. I thought about it. With Mingzhu's personality, she won't care if she's in danger or not. But with you it's different." Li suddenly looked at him and asked, "You didn't tell this to your brother Shen, did you?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "I'm not stupid. This kind of thing, other than the 3 of us, I can't tell anyone else. Do I look like the kind of person who would casually tell this kind of thing to others?" "That's not necessarily true." Li shook his head and said, "I heard that your brother Shen has a beautiful and charming sister. If you use a honey trap a little, do you think I'll be so ungrateful for a beauty?" Li Xian looked at him and said seriously, "But you don't say Brother Shen's sister is really beautiful." "I'm just joking. How could I not trust you?" Li Yi waved his hand. In fact, compared to Brother Shen's sister, he was more worried about Brother Shen himself. Speaking of honey traps, Li Xian suddenly looked at him and asked, "You have so many beauties around you, I'm worried about you. Do you think I'm that kind of person?" Li looked at him and asked, "I trusted you so much, and this is how you treat my trust?" Hearing this, Li Xian lowered his head in shame and said, "I still think you are. For them, what wouldn't you do? Furthermore, your wife seems to have a younger sister who's even more beautiful and charming than her." Chapter 938. Like a flower, like jade enchanting, like jade enchanting. When Mississippi Lu becomes enchanting, Li Yi will also be able to smile in the underworld. Li Xian's face showed a thoughtful expression, and he suddenly asked, "Do you think it's a good idea to let Emingzu sit in that position?" Li Yi peeled an apple, took a bite, put it aside and picked up another one. "Whether it's for you or for Emingzu, it's the safest for her to sit in that position." Li Xian looked at the pieces of apple skin he peeled and fell down in a spiral shape, and asked, "It's a good thing for any one of you, but what about the 2 of you?" "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean." Li Xian looked at him meaningfully, and when the last piece of apple skin fell down, he stretched out his hand and said, "Thank you." Crack. "I don't know." Li took a bite of the apple, and with one in each hand, he got up and walked out of the pavilion. Rui and the crown princess had already come down from the boat. The two little fellows seemed to be very interested in the water, so the two had to bring them onto the boat. With Rui around, there was no need to worry about safety. The arrogant Lolita did not get on the boat this time. She trotted over and snatched an apple from Li Yi's hand. She did not care if he took a bite or not, and happily chewed on it. I don't care what you and Imingzi think, and I don't care what's going on between the two of you. Li Xian walked over from behind, holding an unpeeled apple in his hand. After taking a bite, he said, "Let's get through this first. Those fellows in the imperial court have been spoiled. It's time for them to calm down and think about it." After hearing what he said, Li Yi found that he had to face a reality. He had only seen Li Xian a few times recently, but he was no longer the silly and adorable Li Xian from before. Could it be that he had learned this cleverness from Brother Xin? However, this was also a good thing. At the very least, after he became smarter, he could save himself some trouble. The Tsundere Lolita raised her small face and asked, "Brother Xian, what's going on with you and my royal sister?" Li Yi patted her head and said, "He's talking nonsense. Don't listen to him." As she watched Li Yi's figure disappear into the distance, the Tsundere Lolita didn't follow him. She silently nibbled on an apple and muttered, "Sir, you're just brushing me off. Imperial Mother once said that if a man brushed you off and said no, then he really did." These days, the capital was in chaos, unprecedented chaos. A clan with 100 years of history like the Chui clan had suddenly fallen, so how to deal with the Chui clan was a huge problem. How should the officials and nobles that were implicated because of the Chui clan be dealt with? The crimes of the 30 or so families from before had almost been proven, but the implications were too great, so no one dared to make a rash judgment. The king of Shu had fled. Noble consort Chui's position as noble consort had been taken away, and she was still waiting to be dealt with in the cold palace. His Majesty was seriously ill, and the officials had yet to discuss a plan. Some of the envoys from the Qi kingdom had already left the capital. Such a major event had happened in the Jing kingdom. Presumably, the other countries would soon receive the news. When that time came, there would probably be a lot of trouble. The various reforms of the imperial court were still being carried out, and various yamen were constantly dealing with chores. Recently, there had been frequent handover of official positions, and it was difficult for the newly appointed officials to grasp the rules in a short period of time. Prime Minister Qin was sick, and had already taken a leave of absence for more than a month. There was no one to preside over the reform, and it couldn't be reversed or stopped. Under such circumstances, the princes had entered the capital without being summoned. Although it was against the law, they were ostensibly visiting the emperor, and no one could use this reason to expel them. It would be fine if they behaved themselves in the capital, but these princes were each more anxious than the other. They kept on visiting the important officials in the imperial court, and it was obvious how desperate they were. Of course, the most important thing was that the eldest princess was also sick and hadn't attended court for 3 days. When Her Highness was around, although these things still existed, Her Highness would always be able to make proper arrangements for everything. Now that Her Highness was sick, the morning court session wasn't held, and the officials were without a leader. Chaos everywhere. During these few days, all the officials from the 3 provinces, 6 ministries, and 24 departments were looking forward to it. When Her Highness was around, they didn't feel anything. Now that Her Highness had taken a leave of absence, the entire imperial court seemed to be in a mess. In the Shangshu province, this new policy was proposed by Her Highness. Now that the implementation has met with obstacles, it needs to be resolved immediately. What should we do? Lord Dong, you've been with the princess for a long time. Please say something. Dong Wenyan shook his head and said, "My understanding of this is limited, and I don't dare to speak recklessly." Suddenly, someone slapped the table fiercely and said, "What is Prince Exine trying to do? The invitation has already been sent to the Shangshu province. Is he that impatient? These are all small matters. How should we deal with the Chui clan's matter? His Majesty and the princess haven't given us any information, so we can't make a rash decision." Prime Minister Qin. Prime Minister Qin hasn't been here for a long time. This can't go on. I wonder how Her Highness's condition is. When will she get better? It's not good for us to inquire about such matters. The complicated imperial court affairs caused countless officials to feel troubled, and the entire Shangshu province was in a state of chaos. This is the Shangshu province. What's with all the commotion? An elderly voice rang out from outside the door, and everyone's gazes quickly looked over. Prime Minister Qin. Prime Minister Qin, you're finally back. Quick, come in. Someone walked out quickly and helped Prime Minister Qin, who was holding onto a walking stick, into a chair. Prime Minister Qin tapped his walking stick heavily on the ground, and said with a disappointed expression, "All of you are the pillars of our Jing kingdom, the pillars of the imperial court. The entire country's future depends on all of you. The eldest princess has only been away for a few days. Look at all of you. Look at all of you. Do all of you still look like officials of the imperial court?" Hearing this, everyone lowered their heads in shame. Prime Minister Qin was right. They had already forgotten what it was like in the past. However, ever since the eldest princess took over the government, whenever they encountered any problems that they could not solve, they would just need to submit a report, and there would be a perfect solution very soon. They were already used to such a life, going to the yamen every day. There were no headaches, and when they were in a good mood, they would go home and change into casual clothes. They could even go to the brothels to listen to plays. It was naturally impossible for them to get used to returning to the days where they had a headache every day. Prime Minister Qin coughed a few times before standing up. He looked at everyone and asked, "Look at all of you now. If Her Highness no longer takes over the government in the future, are you all going to continue being like this?" Everyone looked even more ashamed. Prime Minister Qin was right. Her Highness was only acting for a while. When the new emperor succeeded the throne, she would naturally leave the imperial court. This was a fact that they had always ignored. After Prime Minister Qin's reminder, they finally realized something. Her Highness would eventually leave. After Her Highness left, who would inherit the position? One of those mediocre people who visited the ministers one by one in the capital? Without Her Highness, what kind of life would they have in the future? It was enough to think about the past few days. Of course, this was only an ideal situation. If there were no accidents, it would be much more difficult than it was now. It was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. They had already gotten used to the previous way. They could no longer easily turn back. Why did they have to turn back? This was a question worthy of everyone's consideration. Li Yi and Li Xian didn't need to think about it. After September, the weather would gradually become cold. It was better to sit down and eat a hot pot than to think about those messy things. Mississippi Lu and Princess Royal wanted to see who could cut the lamb thinner and taste better. Naturally, there needed to be a judge. Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's been too hot these days. I can't taste it in my mouth." If you can't taste it, just say that you can't taste it. Don't make excuses. Li Xian glanced at him and volunteered. He waved his hand. "I'm good at tasting dishes. I'll do it." Li Yi looked at him and decided to take back his evaluation of him a few days ago. Li Xian put the meat rolls they had cut into the pot. After tasting it, he already had an answer in his heart. He nodded and said, "I think." Mississippi Lu unsheathed autumn water and began to carefully wipe it. Princess Royal looked into the distance and cracked her knuckles. "I think." Li Xian blinked his eyes and began to sweat. He looked at Li Yi, who was quietly eating next to him. When he turned back, he shook his head with a serious face and said, "I'm sorry, I've also been too hot these days. I really can't taste it." Chapter 939. In the end, in order to prove that Emingzu and Rui's culinary skills were on par, Li Xian finished all the remaining meat rolls by himself. Perhaps it was because he had eaten too much, but his face was red. He looked at Li Yi with a resentful gaze. Young people had to grow up. In the past, he had been as innocent as Li Xian. Later on, he was taught by Mississippi Lu and the Princess Royal. He understood that at some junctures in life, it was better to give up than to make a choice. Li Xian rubbed his stomach and laid on the chair without any grace. He mumbled, "I was right? The officials in the court have long been spoiled by Emingzu. Without Emingzu, they wouldn't dare to do anything. Look at how chaotic the court is now. It had to be said that Li Xian's idea was not bad. Even Li Yi didn't think of it. There was a saying that went like this. There was once a wise empress who stood in front of the officials, but they didn't cherish her. When they lost her, it was too late for regrets. This was the most painful thing in the world. Although Her Highness's few days off were not enough for the courtiers to think about a certain aspect, it was enough for them to calm down and consider many things. This is a good idea. Li Yi nodded and gave him a thumbs up. He passed an apple to him and said, "Eat some fruits after a meal. It's good for your health." Li Xian's eyes widened. He covered his mouth and ran out. The word eat was not something he could even hear. Because he was too young, he ate too much until he vomited. This was his punishment for making promises so easily. After vomiting, Li Xian's complexion looked much better. However, he slumped into his chair, his bearing as a member of the royal family completely gone. The Princess Royal didn't stay in the palace for a few days. Naturally, the officials couldn't get any information. The strange thing was that she and Mississippi Lu were enemies, but they were always together. Except for sleeping, they spent most of their time together. Li couldn't figure it out. Besides martial arts, what else did they have in common? They couldn't be exchanging experiences other than fighting, right? This made Li Yi a little worried. He looked back at Li Xian and asked, "Help me see what they are talking about." He was now very convinced by Li Xian's lip reading. And he finally discovered his greatest strength. Never underestimate a man with a gossipy heart. Because you never know how much effort he would put in to peep. I can see clearly only when I concentrate. Don't disturb me. Li Xian took out a small telescope from his sleeve and put it to his eyes. Emingzu said that your Rui is too violent. It's not good to always use force on you, and the places he hits are not elegant. Li Yi was deeply gratified. Her Royal Highness was a princess after all. She would love others. This was something that Mississippi Lu, who only advocated violence, would not understand. She also said that she found a secret skill in the palace's library a few days ago. It can make people feel unbearable pain when performing the skill. After the skill is performed, it will return to normal without leaving any trace. She suggested that Rui learn it. Li suddenly remembered that he also had something to suggest to Rui. Right now, Emingzu was still the eldest princess. The two of them could often compare notes with each other. In the future, there would not be many opportunities like this. Rui wanted to seize the opportunity to humiliate her a few more times. After all, a tiger's but could not be touched, and an empress's but could not be spanked. If he did not take advantage of this opportunity, there would not be another one in the future. If she needed help, he could provide it for free. Ministry of Revenue. Minister of Revenue Qin Huan personally saw a person out of the yamen with a smile on his face. He said, "These days the Ministry of Revenue has been busy with the tax reform. If not for you, I would have a headache." Sung Shichen shook his head and said, "Lord Qin, you are exaggerating. As the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, this is my duty." Although there was a difference in rank between the two, Sung Shichen was not only the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, but also the Governor of the capital. He held two important positions. Qin Huan was very polite to him and said with a smile, "These days, Lord Sung, you must be very tired from running between the yamen and the Ministry of Revenue. Quickly go back and rest. Leave the rest of the Ministry of Revenue to someone else. Her Highness's condition has improved. I still have to go to the palace to report. Lord Qin, please see me off." Sung Shichen cupped his hands and turned to get into the carriage. Morning dew hall in the palace. After Sung Shichen finished reporting, he said, "Your Highness, there are already 7 princes who have returned to the capital without His Majesty's edict. The court has different opinions on this. May I ask how this matter should be handled?" Father has no objections on this matter. There is no need to discuss it further. Emingzu put down a memorial and looked down. She said, "Recently, all the yamens have been busy. It must be tiring for you to be busy with both the capital yamen and the Ministry of Revenue." Sung Shichen bowed and said, this official's duty." Emingzu nodded and said, "Although I am working for the court, it is not easy to arrange the affairs of the two manors so well. Reward me with 1,000 bolts of silk, and allow me 5 days of rest. This official is the capital governor and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. This official should do his best for the court. This is my duty. Sung Shichen knelt on the ground and said, Your Highness has shown me gratitude. This official will also be forever loyal to Your Highness. Emingzu put down the memorial in her hand and looked at Sung Shichen. Pledging loyalty to the imperial court and pledging loyalty to her were two different concepts. Sung Shichen had been an official for many years and held a high position. He could not understand the difference between these two sentences. After a while, she sat down again and nodded. Rise. The capital governor was an official in charge of the capital and the Hebei region. He was only a fourth-rank official. In the court, there were many officials who were higher than him. However, in terms of status, the capital governor was no less than the 6 ministers and the chief officials of the 3 provinces. The former capital governor, Dong Wenyun, had already become the mainstay of the Shangshu province. The 2 prime ministers had also held this position before. Generally speaking, this position was just a transitional one. Once they got through it, they would immediately become a true high-ranking official of the court. The current capital governor, Sung Shichen, was originally an official in the King of Shu's faction. Later, he caught the eye of Her Highness and was promoted to his current position. He played an important role in a major case at the beginning of the year, and received unanimous praise from the people of the capital. A few days ago, the officials in the King of Shu's faction were implicated. There were not many families like the Tsung family that survived. The capital governor's residence. A middle-aged official stroked the beard on his chin and shook his head. Everyone in the imperial court is extremely busy now. I'm only able to have this little bit of leisure time because I'm busy. Only Lord Zeng, who is in a high position, still has such leisure and elegance. I'm really envious of you. Sung Shichen smiled and took a sip of tea. He unhurriedly put down a chess piece and said, What Lord Su said is not reasonable. 2 days ago, I was just as busy as my colleagues in the court. If it weren't for Her Royal Highness, who allowed me 5 days of rest, how would I have the time to drink tea and play chess now? The official surnamed Su smiled. Her Highness values Lord Tseng very much. Perhaps in the future, she will have to rely on Lord Tseng. Just as he finished speaking, a servant of the Tseng family knocked on the door and entered, handing an invitation to Sung Shichen. Sung Shichen glanced at it and threw it to the side. He sighed and shook his head slightly. The official surnamed Su was surprised. Lord Tseng, why are you sighing? Prince Xian sent an invitation, inviting me to a banquet tonight. So that's how it is. Lord Su put down his chess piece, shook his head and said, I have received several similar invitations in recent days. These princes are still too anxious. The topic had already changed. Sung Shichen casually asked, In Lord Su's opinion, which of His Majesty's princes is the most virtuous and has the most hope of inheriting the throne? His Majesty is so wise, but none of the princes have learned a single bit of His Majesty's ability. The official surnamed Su shook his head and said, The Prince of Shu, Prince of Xian, Prince of Qi. These princes are all mediocre. In terms of virtue, just look at the news from their fiefs. Not to mention a hair on the eldest princess's head. Even the heir of the Prince of Ning is better than all of them combined. In fact, they can't even compare to a child of Prince Jean. The eldest princess has the talent to rule the world, but unfortunately, she is a woman. Sung Shichen sighed and said, If Prince Xian or Prince Qi were to inherit the throne, I really can't imagine what the world would become in the end. Seemingly affected by his words, the official surnamed Su also revealed a vexed expression. To tell you the truth, Lord Tseng, the eldest princess is unwell this time. I and several colleagues have also thought about this problem. Her Highness and many officials have put in a lot of effort to achieve this. Is it going to be ruined in the hands of others in the future? Sung Shichen revealed a helpless expression. But the eldest princess is only acting in power, and will soon leave the court. It's impossible for her to always. Who said it's impossible? The official surnamed Su raised his head and looked at him. The princes are mediocre, but there is still Prince Jean. In terms of identity, status, and ability, who among the princes can compare to Prince Jean? It's just that Prince Jean is young and can't take on great responsibilities. But before Prince Jean comes of age, the eldest princess can act in power. Isn't that the best of both worlds? Sung Shichen looked at him and said in a low voice, Lord Su, be careful with your words. Chapter 940. Sung Shichen looked at him and said with a frown, Lord Su, you know, other than His Majesty, it's not appropriate for us to talk about this. The appointment of the crown prince had always been the emperor's family affairs. As foreign officials, they shouldn't say much. However, at this moment, Lord Su was obviously exposed. He waved his hand and said, Lord Sung, I'm not afraid to let you know that this is not only my intention, but also the intention of many of my colleagues. If the throne is really inherited by one of Prince Xian or Prince Qi, then all the hard work we've put in over the years, everything Her Highness has done for the Jing Kingdom, and all the achievements we've made so far, will be for naught? Sung Shichen looked up at him and asked, Are there other officials in the imperial court who think so too? Although Prince Jean is young, he's extremely intelligent. Now in the school of mathematics, he's almost independent. He's only 12 years old and is still immature, but in a few years he'll be able to support the country. Lord Su didn't directly answer Sung Shichen's question and continued, Before that, it's most suitable for the eldest princess to continue to govern. Her Highness is deeply trusted by the officials, and has won the hearts of the people. She's loved by all the officials in the world. If it's just the regent, I believe no one will object. Sung Shichen revealed a thoughtful expression. What Lord Su said makes some sense. Let me think about it. Lord Sung, please consider this matter as soon as possible. I also need to contact a few colleagues and discuss it with other colleagues in the imperial court. Before the game was over, Lord Su took a sip of tea, stood up, and cupped his hands saying, I'll take my leave today. Sung Shichen stood up to send him off. Take care, Lord Su. Lord Su was deep in thought. When he walked out of the capital governor's residence, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. There seemed to be something wrong. He came here today only to drink a cup of tea and play chess. Why would he discuss the appointment of the crown prince? Why would he reveal this immature idea in his heart? He thought about it carefully and finally understood. He had wanted to drink tea and play chess. He could only blame Prince Xian's post. If it wasn't because of that sudden post, he would still be locked in a battle with Lord Zeng on the chessboard. However, since this topic had been brought up, he couldn't avoid it anymore. Although today was an accident, this matter was indeed imminent. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but quicken his pace. Li Han was indeed a good kid, especially in the past 2 years. He had grown extremely quickly. In just 2 to 3 years, he had grown from a naughty kid who used to pee in his pants to a man who was feared by the students of the Mathematics Academy. The reason why they were terrified was because he was not only Prince Jean, but also the vice dean and the director of political education. In the absence of the dean, he was the dean of the college. He was in charge of all affairs including student rewards and punishments. In terms of status and identity, no one in the academy could compare to him. In terms of knowledge, he was the most outstanding. In addition, he liked to use the method of frog jumping to punish students. It had become a shadow in the hearts of the students of the mathematics faculty that could not be erased. Of course, in front of outsiders, no matter how tough he appeared, he could not hide the fact that he was only 12 years old. The Tsundere Lolita, who was almost 15 years old, was his nemesis. Li Han was instructed to put on the chicken wings while she ran excitedly to Li Xian's side, wanting him to show her the technique of knowing what people were talking about without listening to them. Brother Xian, help me take a look. What is Li Han muttering softly over there? Li Xian turned his head to take a look. After a moment he turned back and said, He said that royal sister Shanning is the laziest and only knows how to eat. She let him do all the dirty and tiring work. Such a lazy girl. No one will want her in the future. The Tsundere Lolita ran over angrily and twisted Li Han's ear. The latter had a horrified expression and said with a trembling voice, Royal sister, how did you know? Great, you actually dared to secretly scold me. The Tsundere Lolita actually said that no one would want her in the future. The Tsundere Lolita turned her head to look in a certain direction. When she saw Li Yi sitting together with the eldest princess, she exerted even more force. Li Yi looked at Li Han, who was being chased by Shanning, and turned his head to ask Emingzu, "What do you think of Prince Jean?" "Li Han is a good child." Emingzu nodded and said, "Although he is young, he is the one who can endure hardships the most out of all the princes. These few years he has been put in the arithmetic academy to train, and he has grown a lot. He has already left the other princes of his age far behind." Li Yi nodded and said, "In the past he was a little mischievous. These 2 years he has finally calmed down. I don't know what will happen in the future, but at least for now, his nature is still very pure." The king of Shu had lost power, and the old emperor was seriously ill. Many princes couldn't wait to enter the capital, and they couldn't wait to start the fight for the throne. Their efforts didn't go to waste. After the prince's invitations and visits, the officials and nobles in the capital finally had some changes in the direction of the court. These days, the voices calling for Prince Jean Li Han to succeed the throne were very loud. After all, apart from his young age, Prince Jean was much better than those princes in some aspects. When he was 10 years old, he had single-handedly crushed the conspiracy of the Qi Kingdom's diplomatic mission and saved the face of the Jing Kingdom. These few years, he had devoted himself to the study of mathematics, and it was unknown how many difficult problems he had solved for the court, and who knew how many mathematical talents he had trained for the court. Wouldn't it be better for such a person to be the emperor than those idiotic princes? Being young was not a problem. Behind him, there was the eldest princess regent. As the emperor, he just needed to grow up. In the process of growing up, if he could learn 10 or 20% of the eldest princess's knowledge, it would be enough to deal with the complicated political affairs. After all, what the officials cared about was not who would become the emperor, but whether or not the court would be as stable as it was now after that person became the emperor. Would they still be able to follow the eldest princess to get rid of the internal troubles, deter the external enemies, and implement one beneficial policy after another to make the weak Jing Kingdom stronger and stronger? Emingzu looked into the distance and said, "I hope that in the future he can be like father. Why do you care so far away?" Li Yi glanced at her and said, "Anyway, in a few years." Emingzu tilted her head to look at him and asked, "What about in a few years?" Li Yi looked away and shook his head. "Let's talk about it in a few years." In a pavilion far away from them, Changde helped Emperor Jing to sit down slowly and stood quietly at the side. Prince Ning slowly walked over and helped him tidy up the fur coat on his shoulders and sat beside him. Emperor Jing tilted his head and looked into the distance. "These days, there seems to be some other voices in the court?" Prince Ning nodded and said, "A few days ago, there were suddenly more voices in the court calling for Prince Jean to succeed the throne and for Emingzu to become the regent." Emperor Jing looked forward and murmured, "I did not expect that there would be a day when this country could not do without Emingzu. She has suffered." Prince Ning looked up into the distance and shook his head. "Although she is a woman as a member of the royal family, this is what she should do." After he finished speaking, he looked at Emperor Jing and asked, "Imperial brother still hasn't announced it. Are you waiting for next year's court meeting? What do you think His Majesty and Prince Ning are talking about?" Li Yi looked at the pavilion in the distance, then looked at Li Xian and asked, "Why don't you take a look? Maybe Imperial Uncle and Imperial Father are talking about something important. This is not good, right?" Li Xian shook his head and took out the binoculars from his arms. "What court meeting?" Li Xian frowned and waved his hand. "Don't talk and don't move. Otherwise, I won't be able to see it." When Li Xian was concentrating, he needed to isolate himself from the outside world. Li Yi simply held his breath. Mingzhu's lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she shook her head and let them be. "This is Xian Er's responsibility." Li Xian looked in that direction attentively and murmured, "What my responsibility? What responsibility do I have? If Emingzu is a man?" Li Xian couldn't help laughing. He reached out and patted Li Yi. "If Emingzu is a man, you will die of anger. In order to protect him, you kept him by your side with Emingzu. Li Xian's body suddenly froze and he could no longer speak. After a long time, his face showed anger. He suddenly raised his hand, and the binoculars fell to the ground and scattered. His face was ferocious, but his body could not stop trembling. He pointed in a certain direction and scolded. "What kind of lousy lip reading is this? How dare he use this kind of thing to deceive me? I will kill him when I return." Chapter 941. In order to create a quiet environment for Li Xian, Li Yi and the eldest princess did not make any noise. Li Xian suddenly flew into a rage. After he smashed the telescope in his hand, the atmosphere became even quieter. Li Yi looked away from him and met the eldest princess's eyes. There seemed to be 1,000 words in his heart, but when the words reached his mouth, he could only open his mouth. Emingzu was the same as him. Because of some news, her state of mind was disturbed, and her eyes lost focus. Some things existed in the heart. Originally, they were just doubts, like a veil in the fog, hazy and unclear, until the wind blew and blew everything away, revealing the naked truth. The doubts in the heart could all be connected. One was the ruler of a country, and the other was the mistress of the harem. Why did they hide it from the officials and secretly leave the capital to come to Qing, and prefecture hundreds of miles away? They almost lost their lives there. The old emperor was also very good to Li Xian. He was so good that it was beyond the limit. Almost all of his requests were granted. He was so good that he treated him better than his own son. The empress treasured the crown princess even more. She often brought her to the palace. She was no less than her own daughter Emingzu. On the contrary, Princess Ning frequently entered the palace as soon as she arrived in the capital. Almost everything she did, she would ask for Mingzhu's company. The Wang family abandoned the most powerful king of Shu and married their daughter to Li Xian. They were not at all worried about the revenge of the king of Shu after he ascended to the throne. This was not stupid. They were choosing sides. Li Yi finally understood where the master of the Wang family's eternal confidence came from. As wise and far-sighted as the old emperor, how could he not know the importance of choosing a successor to the country? But no matter how dangerous the situation was, he avoided this issue, because there was nothing to talk about. He already had a candidate in mind, but before that, he had to help him clear up the internal and external troubles of the Jing kingdom. Until now, the Cui family had fallen, the king of Shu had escaped, the capital had been bathed in blood, and the enemies did not dare to act rashly under the threat of Tian Fa. Most importantly, Emingzu and Li Xian's birthdays were on the same day. Princess Ning and the Empress happened to be in the same summer palace when they gave birth. After that, they lived in the same place for many days. Li didn't know if their birthdays were on the same day, but he knew that he was extremely stupid. There were so many coincidences, so many obvious clues, but he had never thought in that direction. When he found out the truth, he couldn't even say a word. The old emperor and the empress were worried that Li Xian would be like the previous two princes who had died young, and would be persecuted by evil people, so they swapped him with Prince Ning's daughter. Li Xian went to Qing and Fu, and Emingzi stayed in the capital. Who would care about a princess and think that she could threaten their throne? Of course, reality proved that they were wrong. Even if the empress gave birth to a princess, she could still threaten the throne they wanted. And the reason for all of this was because of everything Li Xian and Emingzu had done these few years. Of course, Li Xian's good idea had changed the situation in the court, allowing the thing that had been hidden under the water to surface. And this was also the most laughable, or rather ironic. He personally handed over the throne that belonged to him to Emingzu. His eagerness were even more than Emingzu himself. Li Xian stepped on the telescope that had already been broken into pieces. Then he turned his head and looked at Li Yi and Emingzu with a pale face. He murmured, "Save me." The eldest princess raised her head to look at him. A smile suddenly appeared on her face. Like a taut string suddenly relaxing, her entire person relaxed in this instant. She said, "Actually, this is the best ending." Li patted his shoulder and sighed. "Good luck, we all think highly of you." "No, you can't do this to me." We agreed. Li Xian's body trembled. His expression was terrified, and his voice was slightly hysterical. "I'll go back first," Emingzi said softly. She turned around and walked in the direction she came from. Li didn't know what to say to her. At this time, it was not only that matter that was involved, but also her life experience. In an instant, her father was not her father, and her mother was not her mother. For the past 20 years she had been kept in the dark. No matter how strong she was, she needed time to accept it. I'll go back too. Li shook his head. With such a huge gap, not only Emmingse needed time, but at this time, all three of them needed time. Li Xian shook his head violently and murmured, "You can't do this, you can't do this." Li really couldn't think of any words to comfort him. After looking at him apologetically, he turned around and left. The proud Lolita ran over from a distance. She raised a roasted black chicken wing to Li Yi and said, "Sir, the chicken wing is ready. I roasted it for you myself. Try it." Li Yi took the chicken wing and took a bite. He knew that she not only forgot to add seasoning, but also did not roast it well enough. The outside was already black, and the inside was still a little raw. The proud Lolita asked expectantly, "How does it taste?" Li Yi finished the chicken wing in 2 or 3 bites, wiped his fingers and nodded. "It's delicious." "Then I'll roast it for you, sir." The nervous expression on the proud Lolita's face disappeared. Finally, joy appeared on her face, and she ran quickly to the grill. Li Yi stopped her, shook his head, and said, "Sir has something to do. I'll go back first." "Oh," the proud Lolita responded with some disappointment. Then she raised her head, smiled, and said, "It's okay. Sir's business is more important. If you like it, I'll roast it for you next time." Li Yi smiled at her, turned around and left. After a while, the proud Lolita put her hands on her hips and looked down at Li Han, who was squatting on the ground. She asked, "How is it? Is it delicious?" Li Han said with a bitter face, "I'm not eating it. The outside is burnt, and the inside is not cooked. I forgot to add seasoning. It's not delicious. I'll have diarrhea if I eat it." "Nonsense." The proud Lolita looked at him with shame and anger, and said, "I roasted it like this just now. Sir said it was delicious and he ate it all." Li Han's face became even more bitter. He looked at her and said, "That's because Sir likes you. No matter how bad your roasted food is, even if you gave Sir a raw one, he would still say it was delicious." The anger on the proud Lolita's face immediately turned into shyness. She pinched the corner of her clothes and said to herself, "Really? Mother seemed to say the same thing. Really, really?" Li Han raised his hand and said, "I swear among everyone apart from Yong Ning, you're the one that Sir likes the most." When he saw his royal sister frown, he immediately changed his words and said, "No, Sir likes you and Yong Ning the most. He likes both of you the most." After a long while, Li Han sat on the ground and let out a long sigh of relief as he watched his royal sister, Shaning, run away shyly. The chicken wing she roasted was really terrible. This was the worst chicken wing he had ever eaten. How could Sir lie like this? He even ate it all. Wasn't he afraid of diarrhea? Of course, he could only say these words in his heart this time. He didn't dare to whisper them out loud. "Little Han." A voice suddenly came from behind him. Li Han jumped up from the ground in fright. He only relaxed when he saw who it was. He asked, "Brother Xian, why are you looking for me?" An extremely kind smile appeared on Li Xian's face as he said, "Come here. Brother Xian has something to tell you." Although Brother Xian's smile was very kind, as if he had some great news to tell him, Li Han felt a chill run down his spine. He felt his hair stand on end, as if a great disaster was about to befall him. Sir had said that when you faced an unknown problem that you couldn't handle, you should rely on your intuition. Li Han's first instinct was to run. Thus he really ran. He was extremely fast and didn't even look back. It was as if there was a monster chasing after him. Li Xian smiled as he looked at the rapidly fleeing figure. He extended his hand and murmured, "No matter how fast the little monkey runs, he won't be able to escape from the palm of the Buddha." Chapter 942. No matter how powerful Sun Wukong was, he couldn't escape from the palm of the Buddha. In the end, Li Han was still captured. After being forced to sit down at the table, he became much more well-behaved. He lowered his head and asked dispiritedly, Brother Xian, why are you looking for me? Since ancient times, speaking was an art. If it wasn't necessary, very few people would go straight to the point. This was a very impolite behavior. After all, he couldn't just wait until Li Han had settled down and ask him if he wanted to be the emperor. I have a throne for you. Do you want to consider it? The first step should be to be polite and get closer to him. Li Xian handed over a chicken wing that he had just roasted and asked, Xiao Han, how are things at the Mathematics Institute recently? Are you busy? Are the professors at the Imperial College safe and sound? I heard that you often go to the Women's Institute recently. Do you have a girl you like? Don't be shy, just say it. Brother Xian was like you back then. The Imperial College's mathematics department had been defeated by Li Han fair and square. They had lost face, and the mathematics department had been directly merged into the mathematics department. These people had been thinking about how to raise their heads again, and wanted to make the mathematics department independent again. Of course, they had been ruthlessly attacked by Li Han every time. He had already announced that unless those people could defeat him in a fair and square battle, they would have to obediently become subordinates of the Mathematics Academy. There's nothing to worry about those idiots. Li Han shook his head and suddenly blushed. Brother Xian, who did you hear this from? I don't often go to the Women's Institute. It's just a bunch of troublesome girls, what's there to go? He actually often went to the Women's Institute. Sister Shanning was as fierce as a tiger cub. She would only become a sheep in front of her teacher. However, He Duanwu, who often played with her, always spoke softly and always gave him delicious food. She was much gentler than Sister Shanning. Li Xian only asked casually and didn't continue the topic. He had already said all the pleasantries, and now it was time to get to the main topic. He leaned towards Li Han and asked, Xiao Han, have you ever thought about being the emperor? Li Han had already brought the chicken wing to his mouth. He was startled when he heard this and asked curiously, Big Brother Xian, why do you ask? In his heart, the emperor was his father. The future emperor would definitely be one of his brothers. It had nothing to do with him. He only needed to guard the School of Mathematics. When the teacher gave him the position of the dean, he would be the absolute master of the School of Mathematics. Although he had almost achieved this, he was still a man who didn't want a proper title. Li Xian looked at him and said, Just tell me if you want to or not. Li Han stared at him with an aggrieved expression. Brother Xian, I'm still a child. Li Xian's face revealed a trace of anxiety as he said, It's not like I'm asking you to be one right now. I'll let your eldest royal sister keep an eye on it for now. When you grow up, Li Han gave it some thought and asked, But what about King Qi and King Xian's royal brothers? They can go back to where they came from. Li Xian waved his hand and asked, Just tell me, if you were to become the emperor, would you be willing? I'm not willing, Li Han replied straightforwardly. He knew how tired his father was in the past. He didn't even have time to play with him. If he became the emperor, how would he manage the School of Mathematics? How would he have the time to play with He Duanwu? This was a debt that didn't even need to be calculated. Coincidentally, he was very good at calculating debts. Furthermore, he looked at Li Xian and said, Father is doing fine as the emperor. Why do you have to ask me? Imperial father, Imperial father. Li Xian opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't finish his sentence. He snatched the chicken wing from his father's hand, waved his hand and said, Forget it, it's fine now. Go and play. He lay on the grass and gnawed on the chicken wing as he pondered about life. His uncle had become his father. Her Highness had become his mother. His father had become his uncle. And his mother had become his aunt. Damn it. What the hell was going on? On Mingzhu's side, she should be as distressed as he was. When Li Yi walked into the Morning Dew Palace with a bowl of egg-fried rice and a jar of wine, a figure in the back of the palace was waving a long sword in his hand. The sound of the sword whistled. The figure didn't stop until he put down the bowl. After sitting down, he minded his own business and ate. Li Yi filled her cup with wine and sat quietly at the side. I'm fine. The eldest princess's expression was calm. She didn't seem to be affected at all. Li Yi naturally couldn't say what he wanted to say next. Li Yi shook his head and said, Actually, if it's a princess, it's not bad. At least, It's much easier than the princess or the empress. The eldest princess didn't even raise her head. What's easier? Life is much easier. You don't have to worry about the affairs of the court. Just leave it to Li Xian. Li looked at her and said, "Don't put all the burdens on your shoulders. It's not your responsibility, it's Li Xian's. You should also have your own life. To be honest, unless it's absolutely necessary, I don't want you to take that step. Once you've taken that step, it's very difficult to take it back. I also think it's easier to be a princess." Emingzu raised her cup and said, "Drink with me." Li didn't like to drink, especially this kind of strong wine. Not only because he didn't like the spicy taste, but also because he couldn't hold his liquor well. When he was drunk, it was easy for him to do something out of line, especially in the presence of the opposite sex. If he took advantage of a girl, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. Of course, the person he was drinking with was the eldest princess. The princess should be worried about him. However, today's situation was special. He might as well risk his life to accompany the princess and get drunk. Drink. Li filled his cup, clinked his cup with hers, and drank the wine in one gulp. His head hurt. Li didn't know how many cups he drank yesterday. After a few cups, he couldn't remember what happened after that. He didn't even know how he came back. After washing his face in the morning, he sat at the dining table. His head was still throbbing. Fortunately, his butt didn't hurt, which meant that nothing embarrassing happened yesterday. The old emperor's tricks were unbelievably deep and completely disrupted their plans. They didn't know whether they should be happy or worried. The matter that the three of them had pushed forward with all their might had such an accident. It was really embarrassing. Young master, Xiao Huan's voice gradually became clearer. Li Yi came back to his senses and tilted his head. Seeing her worried face, he asked, "What's wrong?" "Young master, what's wrong?" The young maidservant's big eyes were full of worry. Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing. But the piece of rib in your hand is the one that second miss just ate." Li Yi looked down. No wonder he didn't eat any meat after eating for so long. He thought that the cook had skimped on the ingredients, but it turned out that Mississippi Lu had secretly eaten it. He picked up another piece. Rui put down her chopsticks and looked at him worriedly. "Husband, this piece is the one that The rib that she had eaten was on the table. Why did she have to find an empty plate to put it on? Wasn't that a waste of a plate? The detergent was free." Li finally found an uneaten rib. Just as he brought it to his mouth, he saw Xiao Huan looking at him curiously. "Young master, do you really not remember what happened yesterday?" Chapter 943. Yesterday. Li Yi's heart tightened and he asked, "What happened yesterday?" He only remembered that Emingzu was in a bad mood after learning about her parentage yesterday, so he drank a few glasses of wine with her. He didn't remember what happened after that. Could it be that after getting drunk, some primitive impulse was aroused, and he forced himself on her? She couldn't resist, and then the two of them did something indescribable? After thinking about it, it was impossible. After all, there was still a small gap between his strength and Mingzhu's. Even if his strength was a little enhanced after getting drunk, he was probably still not her opponent. However, if she just resisted symbolically and then gave in half-heartedly, this was also impossible. Emingzu was not that kind of person, and he was not that kind of person either. Li rubbed his eyebrows, but still couldn't remember anything. However, looking at the reactions of Xiao Huan and Rui, it should not be a big deal. "Young master, when you came back yesterday, you carried Dwainer on your neck and ran around the yard. You also told Dwainer that when he grew up, he should not marry Prince Li Xian's Xiaorui. You said that if he married Xiaorui, he would not be able to raise his head for the rest of his life." Dwainer was so scared that he cried. A few black lines appeared on Li Yi's forehead. Was this what he did yesterday? Little Rui was the name of Li Xian's daughter. The name of the heir consort had a heart in it, so he made his daughter's name have 3 hearts in it. This was an act of flattery that couldn't be any lower. When he and Rui's first daughter was born, she would be called Li Si or Li Muyi, which was more artistic and meaningful. Si Muyi Xiaorui. Just by hearing it, it was obvious who was better. Xiao Huan looked at him and asked curiously, "Young master, what's wrong with Xiao Rui?" Of course, there was nothing wrong with Xiao Rui's father. Although there was only a difference of one word between a princess and a princess, the difference was huge. Marrying a princess was called marrying a princess. Marrying a princess was called marrying a princess. Marrying a princess was not marrying a wife. It was like bringing back an ancestor. He would be looked down upon by the world. A good princess would become a princess, and she would be the eldest princess. No one knew better than him how difficult it was to marry the eldest princess. Of course, things would be much easier if the princess became a princess. Xiao Rui is fine. Li shook his head and said, "I'm just telling Dwainer kids shouldn't fall in love at such a young age." Xiao Huan lowered her head, with a soft voice said, "Son-in-law used to not drink outside. When he came back he would hug and kiss eldest miss." Xiao Huan. Rui blushed and glanced at her. Xiao Huan immediately stopped talking. Even if you don't ask, you still say it without hesitation. Suddenly, there was a chilly wind in the room. Li took a sip of tea to rehydrate himself. "What did I say?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "Li Emingzu can't be the empress anymore?" There was no need to hide this from Mississippi Lu, so Li nodded and said, "It's unlikely. If she was the princess royal, with the current situation and all obstacles removed, the probability of her ascension to the throne was more than 50%. Of course, if she was only an assistant, the success rate was close to 100%. But now her status was that of a princess, and it was not legitimate. Once her identity was announced, no matter how high the courtiers' expectations of her were, no matter how much they relied on her, they would not allow a princess to sit on the throne. In fact, thinking about it carefully, this was really the best ending. All the dirty and tiring work was left to Li Xian to do. And Emingzu did not sit on the throne, and there would be a lot less trouble in the future. This should be something to be happy about. But Mississippi Lu didn't seem very happy. Li looked at her and asked tentatively, "What else did I say?" Mississippi Lu's eyes narrowed slightly, looked at him, and said coldly, "You also said that you have seen many women, many naked women." Slander, naked slander. Except for Rui, Zuemo, and Mississippi Lu herself, he had never seen other women naked. Mississippi Lu was hazy at that time, and she was in the bathtub, so it couldn't be counted at all. Zuemo was just an accident. There were only 2 people in total, and they were all his women. What was wrong with this? You want to lie to me again? Li looked at her and said seriously, "I can swear to God, except for that time with you, I have never seen other women naked that I shouldn't see." "Which time?" Second Miss Lu picked up autumn water and thought of something. She gently put it down and looked at him, asking coldly, "Is that so? Then tell me, Bo Duo Yi Jieri, Big Chiao Wei Jiao, Tian Hai Yi, Taotani Satoshi Li Xiang. Who are these women?" Li put down the teacup, pursed his lips, and looked at her. He asked, "What question did you ask me last night when I was drunk?" Mississippi Lu looked away and said, "I didn't ask. You said it yourself." Li didn't expose her lie. He sighed and said, "Can the words of a drunk person be trusted? Think about it, Padokid Zuemo Amami, Jing Kingdom, and Qi Kingdom. Are there people with such strange names around us? What about Li Xiang? What else do you have to explain?" This. Li looked at her and explained, "Tarotani and Li Xiang are actually the same person. You really don't know them?" Li looked at her eyes and said, "I swear in this world without them, it's even more impossible for me to know them." Mississippi Lu looked at him and didn't see any signs of lying in his eyes. Li Yi, on the other hand, was slightly terrified. 4 hours, 240 minutes, 14,400 seconds. She even knew about Li Xiang. How many questions did she ask him? What else did she not know? Li looked at her and asked cautiously, "What else did I tell you?" A meaningful smile appeared on Mississippi Lu's face. "Why don't you take a guess?" Chapter 944. Mississippi Lu didn't smile often, but when he saw her smile, Not only did Lee not feel like a spring breeze, but he felt a chill all over his body. The more she said so, the more uncertain he was in his heart. As the old saying goes, people respect each other because of virtue. People make friends because of affection. People follow because of righteousness. People believe because of sincerity. As the old saying goes, I reflect on myself 3 times a day. Am I disloyal to others? Do I not believe in my sister-in-law? Do I not learn from others? This more or less mentioned the integrity or frankness in interpersonal relationships. But as the old saying goes, people should keep a certain safe distance from each other. It was necessary to communicate with others, but even if they were husband and wife, they still needed to leave a certain amount of private space. If there were no secrets between them, it was tantamount to standing naked in front of each other all the time, and they would definitely feel uncomfortable in their hearts. Lee now felt that he was standing naked in front of Mississippi Lou, and he was being scanned by her invasive eyes and scrupulously. For hours. Only God knows what she had asked, and what he had said to her. This was taking advantage of someone's perilous state. This was looting a burning house. This was an extremely immoral act. How could she do this? Lee looked away and said, Don't look at me like that. I'm not afraid of ghosts knocking on the door if I haven't done anything wrong. Mississippi Lou looked at him with a faint smile and asked, I didn't say anything. What are you afraid of? Li Yi's face became serious. Although he was often bullied by Mississippi Lou, he never took it to heart. But this time she really went a little too far. He looked at Mississippi Lou and asked calmly, Since I said so much last night, did I tell you about that thing? Seeing that Li Yi's expression was unprecedentedly serious, Mississippi Lou's face also became dignified. She asked, What thing? Let me tell you. Li Yi suddenly held her hand and said, I like you. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. Li Yi could clearly feel the expression on Mississippi Lou's face freeze, and a trace of panic flashed across her beautiful eyes. Then, she quickly withdrew her hand that he was holding. She looked at Li Yi and forced herself to calm down. She clenched her fists and said, If you keep talking nonsense like this, I might hit you. Even if you beat me to death, Li Yi looked at her and said, It won't change the fact that I like you. I've read many books, but the one I like the most is you. Li Yi continued to look into her eyes and said, I know this is wrong. I like you without permission. I'm sorry, but no one can control this kind of thing. Are you done? Mississippi Lou's expression became calm. She looked at him and said lightly, After last night, you no longer have any secrets with me. Do you think I will believe what you said? Being exposed in front of him, Lee naturally couldn't pretend anymore. He walked out of the room gloomily. However, he felt much more relaxed in his heart. It was obviously a lie to say that he no longer had any secrets with her. If she really knew all his secrets, how could she not know that what he said just now was not a single lie? It was a clumsy trick that couldn't be any clumsier. The only strange thing was that she didn't choose to hit him directly. It seemed that her temper had been much more restrained these days. If it was in the past, she would have torn himself and the table apart, in the room. Mississippi Lou calmly retracted her hand from the corner of the table and put the broken corner on the table. She picked up a cup of tea, and circles of ripples immediately rippled in the teacup. Outside the door, as soon as Lee walked out, a voice slowly came from behind him. What you said to Rui just now, I have never heard of it before. He turned around and saw Rui standing on the other side, walking towards him. She looked at Lee, shook her head and said, Don't always bully Rui, husband. If you make her angry, I can't stop her. When that time comes, I'm afraid that you will suffer again. Lee was very disappointed. It was Mississippi Lou who bullied him first. He only fought back a little, but Rui actually asked him to give in to her and not bully her. In all honesty, did she need him to give in to her? Moreover, she was a guru. How could she not stop Mississippi Lou? Her elbow was pointing outwards. No, she didn't know whether it was towards the inside or the outside. They were all a family, and they should focus on the vulnerable. Her sister was related, but her husband was not. Moreover, those words that were used to flirt with girls were obviously not said by a decent person. What was she envious of? The words that they usually said secretly in the boudoir were much more inappropriate. Feeling indignant, he went out of the house and went straight to the palace. He was still a little worried about Emingzu. After all, he had experienced this kind of melodramatic life experience. Emingzu was different from him, and her feelings must be more complicated and uncomfortable. When he walked into the morning dew hall, he found that Sing Shichen was also there. Emingzu sat on the top and said, "These days those gossips in the court, stop them from spreading." The gossips in the court were naturally about the matter of Prince Jin inheriting the throne and Princess Royal continuing to take over the government. He was indeed the one who pushed this matter forward. Now that the momentum had been formed with great difficulty, Her Highness wanted to stop it. Sung Shichen was stunned when he heard this, and couldn't help but say, "Your Highness, there is no need to discuss this matter anymore." Emingzu waved her hand and said, "If there is nothing else, you can leave first." "Your Highness, Your Highness." Sung Shichen looked up and could only bow and leave. When he came, he was full of enthusiasm, but when he left his mind was heavy. He naturally saw Li Yi who came in. When he passed by he whispered, "I will wait for you at Zumo's place." Li Yi looked at him and nodded slightly. An unexpected turn of events had occurred, and they needed to give him a good explanation. Li Yi walked over and looked at Emingzu. He thought for a moment and asked, "Yesterday?" Emingzu looked up at him and said, "You'd better not drink in the future." Li Yi thought for a moment and couldn't help but ask, "I didn't do anything to you yesterday, did I?" Seeing that Princess Royal was looking at him with a strange look, he immediately changed his words and said, "I mean, I didn't say anything that I shouldn't have, right?" Emingzu looked at him and asked, "Which one are you referring to?" Li Yi was very curious. He had heard about losing a part of his memory when he was drunk, but how many cups did he drink yesterday? He looked at Princess Royal and asked, "Why didn't you persuade me yesterday?" Emingzu looked at him and said, "I thought it was interesting when you were drunk, so I made you drink a few more cups." It seemed that after two people got along for a long time, their personalities would indeed be a little affected by each other. At least this was the case for Mississippi Lu and Princess Royal. She used to be such a pure and kind real princess, but now, he didn't know if he took the opportunity to take advantage of her or something after he got her drunk yesterday. Emingzu looked at him and said, "I will remember what you said yesterday." Li Yi asked nervously, "What did I say?" Emingzu handed him a cup of tea and said, "You said that if I was tired of my current life, I would go and find you." Li Yi nodded. As a friend, it was normal for him to say that. "You also said at that time." Li Yi's heart trembled and he asked, "At that time, what?" A palace maid came in from outside and said, "Your Highness, His Highness and Princess Consort are here." Li Yi actually wanted to ask what else he said yesterday. It was very likely that the last sentence was the main point, but Prince Ning had come. At the most inappropriate time, he could only stand up and greet him. Princess Consort Ning walked to Emingzu and explained, "I came to the palace to visit your father and passed by here, so I came to take a look." Before yesterday, Li Yi would have thought that this was a very normal sentence. But now, including Princess Consort Ning's expression and eyes when she looked at Emingzu, everything was so full of loopholes. Emingzu had just left the court and was wearing the court clothes. Princess Consort Ning accompanied her to change clothes. "Prince, sit." Li Yi invited Prince Ning to sit down and poured tea for him. Prince Ning raised his head and looked at him with a trace of surprise and confusion in his eyes. The relationship between him and County Marquis Li was not strange, but it was not familiar either. Although he appreciated him very much in his heart, County Marquis Li always had a faint alienation and resistance to him. A prince, and kept him thousands of miles away. This time, for some reason, he was especially enthusiastic. Chapter 945. Li Yi sat down across from Ning Wang and casually asked, "When do you plan to return to Qing and Fu after coming to the capital this time?" Ning Wang took a sip of tea and said, "There are still some things I haven't taken care of. I might have to wait until after next year's court conference." Li Yi nodded. At this court conference, the local officials would all gather in Jingdo. All the princes would also return to the capital. It was indeed a good opportunity to announce that matter. Ningguang put down his teacup and looked at him. He suddenly asked, "The court conference is still early. All the princes have returned to the capital. Since you are the Minister of Honor, you should be familiar with the affairs of the court. The Eastern Palace has not been established yet. Who do you think will be the Emperor's princes?" Li looked at him with a smile on his face and didn't speak. Keep pretending, keep pretending. This matter had clearly been planned by him and the old emperor's brother. Right now he was acting like he didn't know anything at all. If it weren't for Li Xian, the shameless spy who liked to peek at people talking, all of them would have fallen into their trap. Ningguang's gaze was slightly strange. He asked, "Why are you laughing?" Matters of the Eastern Palace should be decided by the emperor alone. As officials, we really shouldn't speak carelessly. However, I feel that at the latest, by this year's court conference, the emperor should have made a decision. Li Yi, who had changed into a new set of clothes, walked out. After saying something that seemed to have a deeper meaning, he raised his hands to Ningguang and rose to leave. For now he was still an outsider, so he wouldn't disturb their family reunion. When the eldest princess saw him out of the hall, Li Yi paused in his steps. He lowered his voice and asked, "Yesterday, I said that when you get tired of it, you can come find me. And then?" The eldest princess, who had already walked to the door of the hall, paused and then turned. There was a smile on her face that Li Yi had never seen before. "Why don't you guess?" "Guess your sister. Where did you learn all these bad habits?" "You're the same as Lu Rui." Li Yi turned around and strode away without looking back. As a man, once a word was spoken, it was impossible to go back on it. Words that were spoken were like water that had been spilled. Even if it was said under the influence of alcohol, he had to be responsible for it. Thinking about it, Emingzu would not simply fabricate something to deceive him at that time. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if she made it up, there would be a limit. She couldn't possibly tell him that after he got drunk yesterday he said, "When you're tired of me, come find me, I'll marry you." Right? There was no such thing. When he walked out of the palace gates and arrived at the Tsung Manor, Tsung Shichen was already waiting for him. Why did His Highness suddenly say those words? What did he mean? What exactly happened? Before Li Yi and Zueyemo could speak, Tsung Shichen stood up and asked impatiently. After coming out of the palace, he was full of shock and confusion. There was no turning back. This matter involved a lot of people. Once it started, there was no turning back. Her Highness's words just now would cause all the efforts they had made these days to go down the drain. He was shocked and anxious. It was already very difficult for him to endure until now. Li Yi sat down, picked up the teacup and said, "It's what you understand." Tsung Shichen was stunned and suddenly said, "Did things change?" Li Yi stretched out his hand and gestured for him to sit down. Then he said, "Don't worry, the final result may be better. You can rest assured, and let them rest assured." Some things could not be said clearly, but for a smart person like Tsung Shichen, it was enough to say this much. Tsung Shichen did not ask any more. After thinking for a while he said in a low voice, "I understand." If he understood, he should go back quickly. These days, the Ministry of Revenue and the capital governor's residence were not busy. As the boss of the two departments, he actually had the free time to sit here and drink tea. If people saw him, they would think he was slacking off again. Of course, they were all polite people, and he could not speak so bluntly. Li Yi pointed to the teapot and said, "There should be no business in the yamen. It's still early. Would Lord Tsung like another cup of tea?" Tsung Shichen nodded. "Thank you, Lord Li." He had completely forgotten the traditional virtues of 5,000 years, and he had also lost the face of his ancestors. He did not even have this little bit of insight. How did he sit in the position of the capital governor? Yes, if he had not gone through the back door with Her Highness, the Tsung family would have been in prison like the Cui family, not to mention the capital governor. Then Li Yi realized that this scene seemed familiar. He should have remembered that Tsung Shichen was such a blind person. Even the thought he had just had was not the first time he had thought about it. People would always fall at a certain place, stand up, and fall a second time. A third time, after waiting for Tseng Shichen to leave, Li turned around and asked Zuemo, "It's been so long. Your wedding dress is almost done, right?" The Luo Shui goddess glanced at him. Soon. Why are you in such a hurry?" On the side, Xiao Chui opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. After being glared at by the Luo Shui goddess, she immediately closed her mouth. Li looked at her and said seriously, "By the end of this year at the latest, if you are not ready by then, I will take you back." Taking a woman in broad daylight. Sung Zuemo looked at him with disdain and said, "Lord Li, you are the head of the Mathematics Academy, a doctor, a county marquis, not a robber. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by the whole capital? There's one thing you're wrong about." Li looked at her and said with a smile, "What doctor, what county marquis, these are all my part-time jobs. In fact, my real job is, really a robber." He picked her up by the waist and put her on his shoulder. Ignoring her panicked patting on his back, he strode into the room. When he walked in, he looked back and said, "Xiao Chui, close the door." "Got it." Xiao Chui ran over excitedly and closed the door. Then, she sat in the corridor with a silly smile on her face. This time, she didn't put her ear on the door to eavesdrop because she knew that even if she did, she wouldn't hear anything. However, at the end of the year, she might be able to hear it. She was happy but also worried. The little servant girl named Xiao Huan in Li's family was very favored. If she went there, would she be bullied? If Xiao Zhu went with her, the two of them shouldn't be afraid of her. Miss was also alone. If Sister Ruoqing went with her, that would be the best. There would be no difference from now. When Li Yi saw Li Xian again, it was already 3 days later. His clothes were disheveled and he looked haggard. 2 dark circles hung on his face, which was especially conspicuous. He looked like a frosted eggplant. He sat opposite Li Yi and gulped down a pot of tea. Looking into his eyes, he asked seriously, "Can I really not escape?" Li Yi nodded his head. As the heir of Ning Wang, he could escape many things. But as the crown prince, as the emperor, he had to bear what he had to bear. Li Xian lay on the chair in frustration. "Damn it! Who are you scolding?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Ning Wang or His Majesty?" "Oh." Li Xian sighed, "Scolding me." Li Yi could not empathize with his situation, but he could understand it very well. Li Xian wasn't a person suitable to be the emperor. That position, to him, was only a restraint, only a burden. What he yearned for was a bigger and more open sky, a sky that no one in this world had ever seen before. Thinking about how he would be the emperor, it was unimaginable. "Say, can I tell Imperial Father that I don't want to be the emperor and let Li Han be. He's still a child." Then say, "Can it be like what we originally planned, me being the emperor and handing over the court to Mingzhu, just like now? With Mingzhu's influence in the court and among the people, aren't you afraid that she will really become the empress and make you a mere figurehead for the rest of her life? Or even just abolish you and ascend the throne herself?" Li Xian's eyes showed yearning as he muttered, "That would be the best. At the beginning, didn't we also think that way?" Li thought for a moment, then looked at him and said, "You wish." After discussing it with him, she would have an in-depth discussion with Mississippi Liu, and at the same time, she would freeload a meal. After eating and drinking to her heart's content, she would leave in satisfaction. The matters of the Mathematics Academy had all been handed over to Li Han. He planned that after this year, he would completely hand over the position of the headmaster to him. The Mathematics Academy was already in a good state. What was going to happen next was just a cycle that would repeat itself step by step. The winter of Jinghe 4th year was not pleasant. It was dry and cold with no snow, and there were frequent chills. It was not just Yongning. Ruoqing had also caught a slight cold 2 days ago. Although she was feeling better now, she still had some symptoms of coughing. Li Yi cooked some pears with rock sugar and placed them in a thermos cup to bring over. Pushing open the door of the courtyard, Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu were playing shuttlecock in the yard. Li Yi asked casually, "Xiao Zhu, where is Ruoqing?" Xiao Zhu was playing shuttlecock. In such a cold weather, there were fine beads of sweat on her forehead. She must have been playing for a long time. She did not raise her head and said, "Miss is in the room. Lee, you can go and find her yourself." Lee walked through the moon door and walked to the corridor. Ruoqing's door was closed. She should be resting. The thermos cup could keep her warm for a long time. Lee did not disturb her immediately. He pushed open another door, walked straight into Zue Mo's room, and put the things on the table. Looking at the bed, he found that she was still sleeping. It was not early. Even if it was a lunch break, she should have gotten up. Lee walked over and said, "Get up, the sun is shining on your butt, you still sleep." The person on the bed was motionless. "If you don't get up, I will go up," Lee said as he walked to the bedside. Seeing that there was still no movement from the bedside, he first rubbed his hands to warm them, then reached under the quilt, reached under her neck, and put one hand through her legs, carried her horizontally, kissed her gently on the neck, and whispered, "Get up. Sister Ruoqing, are you awake? Drink some hot water." Hearing the voice, Lee turned his head and saw Zue Mo walking in from outside the door. He only felt a little confused. "To Zue Mo?" He lowered his head. He did not know when the woman in his arms had changed from Zue Mo to Ruoqing. Her back was originally facing him. When he picked her up, he only cared about kissing her, and did not pay attention to her face. Her eyelashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. There was still a trace of confusion in her eyes. She looked up at Li Yi, and a smile appeared on her face. She reached out and put her hand on Li Yi's face, murmuring, "Is it another dream?" Zue Mo stood at the door, looking straight at him and asked, "What are you doing?" Holding Ruoqing in his arms, Li Yi looked at Zue Mo and murmured, "What am I doing?" "Come here." Zue Mo glared at him and turned to walk outside. Li Yi looked down at Ruoqing and said with a bitter smile, I didn't do it on purpose." At this moment, Ruoqing naturally knew that this was not a dream. Blushing slightly, she explained, "It doesn't matter. The room here is warmer. These 2 days, she has let me sleep here." She looked outside and said, "I'm fine. Go and explain to her quickly." Li gently put her down and tucked her in. He took the soup bowl and scooped a bowl of soup. "This is rock sugar snow pear soup," he said. "It has a secret recipe from the palace. Drink a little. Very soon you won't be coughing anymore." When he walked to another room, Zue Mo was already sitting in front of the bed waiting for him. Li explained, I just thought Ruoqing was you." "I know." Zue Mo looked at him and nodded. "I asked Sister Ruoqing to sleep in my room. It's not your fault. It was good to have a reasonable other half. When there was a misunderstanding, there was no need to explain so much. Actually, even if it wasn't a misunderstanding, and you really wanted to hug Sister Ruoqing, I wouldn't be angry." When Li walked over, she suddenly raised her head and said, "You should marry Sister Ruoqing too. I know you like her too. Anyway, marrying one is marrying two is also marrying. I'll help you persuade her. She likes you no less than me. I'll persuade her. She will definitely agree." It was good that the other half was reasonable, but if it was too reasonable, there must be a trap. The reason Li Yi could live well until now was that he was used to all kinds of tricks, and would not fall into such a clumsy trap. Li Yi frowned and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? You." Zue Mo looked at him and said seriously, "I'm not talking nonsense. She and you started earlier than me. She liked you earlier. I stole the person she likes. I'm sorry for her. Acting was a piece of cake for her and Ruoqing." Li Yi naturally would not be fooled by the surface. He shook his head and said, "Don't think too much all day. I peeked at Sister Ruoqing's diary. I know how she feels about you. I know how much she likes you." Speaking of the diary, memories that were almost forgotten surfaced, and Li Yi's heart began to tangle again. Zue Mo looked up at him and asked, "You know all this too, right?" Li Yi was silent. Zue Mo looked at him and said slowly, "Sister Ruoqing has suffered so much. You cannot let her down." Li Yi took a deep breath and looked at her. He said seriously, "I have never thought of letting her down, nor have I thought of letting you down." "But you really have such thoughts. You have always been thinking about Sister Ruoqing you." As soon as Li Yi's voice fell, A slender hand climbed up his ear. Zuemo looked at him like an angry little tiger. Chapter 947. Li ran out of the room, covered his chest and ran away, like a good girl who was molested by a hooligan. The hooligan was naturally the goddess of Luo Shui. Under his training, the current her was less and less mindful of the distance between the two of them. In the courtyard, Xiao Chui widened her eyes, even forgetting that she was kicking the shuttlecock. The shuttlecock fell to the ground, causing Xiao Zhu to laugh without caring about her manners. You lost, you have to lend me that hairpin to wear for 3 days. We are good sisters, what is mine is yours. If you like it, I will give you that hairpin. Xiao Chui turned her head to look at her, curled her lips and said, but this does not mean that I can't kick you. If not for Li scaring me, I can still keep on kicking. Just now, when she saw Li run out while covering his chest, she was extremely puzzled. Could it be that her young Mrs. Temper was actually so impatient? After so many years, she still couldn't see it? She sighed in her heart. If Xiao Zhu wanted that hairpin, she could just give it to her. Why did she have to play this kind of senseless game with her, causing her to miss that wonderful scene? Inside the room, Li put the bowl that Ruoqing used to the side. He took a pillow and let her lean behind him, so that she wouldn't feel uncomfortable sitting down. Then he sat down beside her and asked, do you feel better? She nodded her head. Much better. Li reached out his hand and touched her smooth forehead. It was no longer hot, just a little cough and weak body. She would recover after a few days of rest. Li helped her pull up the quilt and said, these few days, you should rest well at home. Don't go anywhere. Tomorrow, I will continue to send you medicine. You will be fine in 2 days. Because of the relationship between Shanning and Emingzu, the family never lacked good things from the palace. They could also use the secret prescriptions of the imperial physicians. Last time, when Xiao Huan coughed, Emingzu had the imperial physicians send over a prescription. She almost recovered on the same day. Wan Ruoqing didn't refuse and just nodded obediently. On the contrary, Li was somewhat puzzled. She was usually polite to everyone. Every time he wanted to do something for her, she was always worried that it would trouble him and refused in every way possible. This time, she was actually so obedient. However, it's better for girls to be obedient. Obedient girls are likable. Disobedient girls like Mississippi Lu are likable too. Of course, he didn't know that the 2 rooms were adjacent to each other and had opposite layouts. If there wasn't a wall beside the beds in the 2 rooms would be connected. And this wall was only made of wooden planks. In the past, when she and Zuemo slept in separate rooms, they could hear each other even if they whispered through the wall at night. The Jing Kingdom can't do without the officials who govern a country, and it can't do without the Academy of Science. Uncle Emperor is wise. Li Xian smiled and immediately said, I don't know much about governing a country, and I can't do it well. Fortunately, there is Emingzu. These things can be handed over to Emingzu. I only know these unorthodox ways. Emperor Jing raised his head and looked at Prince Ning. However, Li Xian took out a small box from his bosom and walked to the Empress. He smiled and said, Your Highness, the craftsmen of the Academy of Science have mastered a new technique a few days ago. They can make gold and silver as thin as cicada wings. I asked them to make a phoenix hairpin for you. See if you like it. He took out the hairpin from the box. The hairpin was made very delicately. Because it was very thin, there was no movement when he held it in his hand, but the phoenix feather at the end trembled slowly. It was lifelike and beautiful. A look of surprise appeared on the Empress' face, but she didn't take the hairpin. Instead, she held Li Xian's hand and said, I like it, I like it. As long as it's from Xian Your Highness will like it. Princess Ning coughed lightly and said, Do you only have Your Highness in your eyes, and not me your mother? Li Xian walked over with some flattery, and took out another box from his bosom. He said, Of course Xian can't forget mother. Morning Dew Hall. The princess ate the egg-fried rice and asked with some doubt, Why is the rice they made with the same ingredients and the same steps different from yours? Maybe they didn't put in the effort. Li Yi said casually. If the same ingredients and steps could make delicious food with the same taste, then what was the use of those world-class chefs? Heat control, time, frequency of stir-frying, there were many tricks involved. It wasn't something that others could master. Besides, when those imperial chefs made the egg fried rice, did they put so much love into it? Putting aside the love egg fried rice, Li Yi thought of another matter. He looked at her and said seriously, in the future, you have to be careful of Li Xian. Emingzu looked up at him with doubt in her eyes. He is still a crown prince now. Li Yi explained. When he becomes the emperor in the future, it will be much easier for you to be the empress. You have to guard against him, be careful not to be betrayed by him. Uncle Huang, what Xianer said is true. When it comes to governing a country, Li Yi and Emingzu are much more proficient than me, especially Li Yi. He actually knows everything, but he is lazy. Only when Emingzu looks for him he will say. Li Xian thought for a while and said, a minister of nobility can't restrain him. If he is made prime minister, he can't be lazy anymore. With the two of them working together, there is no problem that our Jing kingdom can't solve. Li Xian was very excited. Emperor Jing smiled and looked at him. He suddenly said, since Xianer knows, you still won't call me imperial father? Li Xian's expression froze and his voice stopped abruptly. Chapter 948. Li Yi felt that he needed to remind Emingzu to be wary of Li Xian. In order not to become an emperor, he would do anything. He might even betray Emingzu in the blink of an eye. Just as he said this, he saw Li Han walk in from outside. He walked to his side and whispered, Sir, are you going to give me the position of the dean of the School of Mathematics? Li Yi looked at him and asked, who said that? Although the position of dean would be given to him sooner or later, he could not take it before he said it. This was like the throne. Once he said it, it would not be giving up the position, but usurping it. Li Han was stunned and did not know how to answer for a moment. Li Yi looked at him and asked, do you think that you are very powerful and qualified to be the dean? No. Do you think that you know a lot about mathematics? Just a little. A little. You are modest. Li Yi crossed his arms and said, I will test you on a few questions. If you can answer them, I will give you the position of dean. Although Li Han was young, he still knew his place. If mathematics was compared to a mountain, he could only be considered to be halfway up the mountain. The people from the Imperial College of Mathematics were at the foot of the mountain. As for Sir, he had to look up at the top of the mountain from time to time. He could not see clearly in the clouds. Seeing that Li Han's first reaction was to shake his head, Li Yi added, don't worry, you have learned it before. It will not be beyond the scope. Li Han's expression was serious and he said, Sir, please ask the question. Li Yi looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. This kid, how long has he been thinking about the position of the dean of the School of Mathematics? 1 rooster is worth 5 coins, 1 hen is worth 3 coins, 3 chicks are worth 100 coins to buy 100 chickens. How much are the rooster, hen and chicks? Chicken wung 4, chicken hen 18, chicken chick 78, chicken wung 8, chicken hen 11, chicken chick 81, chicken wung 12, chicken hen 4, chicken chick 84. Li Han immediately said the answer. It was the simplest equation of 3 variables. When the teacher came up with the question, he didn't even know how to change the numbers. This question was a must-memorize question for the students of the College of Mathematics. As the acting dean, he had already memorized it by heart. Today, the wall is 5 feet thick. 2 mice can pass through it. The big mouse grows 1 foot a day, the small mouse grows 1 foot. The big mouse grows twice as much as the small mouse grows half as much. When will the 2 mice meet? The 3rd day. Li Han gave his answer in the same instant. He thought that the teacher would give him a difficult question for the second question, but he did not expect it to be a question that he had seen before. Furthermore, it was the simplest question. There should be another question after the original question, which asked how many times the 2 mice would wear. If the questions were asked at the same time, he might have to think about it. What's 80,000 times 90,000? 720,000. After Li Han easily answered the third question, he was already sure that the teacher really wanted to give the position of dean to him. The so-called examination was just a process. Otherwise, why would he always give this kind of free marks? Li rubbed his head and said with a smile, "The study of mathematics is broad and profound. Remember not to be arrogant and conceited. Go back." When Ning Wang accompanied Ning Wangfei into the main hall, he just happened to see Li Han walk out. Seeing his dejected appearance, Ning Wangfei asked with concern, "Little Han, what's wrong? Did someone bully you?" "No, no one bullied me. It's because I'm too stupid." Even the simplest calculation could be wrong, and he still wanted to be the dean. Li Han shook his head. He endured the shame in his heart, and left with his head lowered. Emingzu. Seeing that Ning Wangfei had been looking at Emingzu with tears in her eyes ever since she walked in, Li knew what he had to do. He stood up and cupped his hands. "Your Highness Ning Wang, Your Highness Wangfei, this junior will leave first." At the same time, in a certain hall, the Empress held Li Xian's hand and also had tears in her eyes. Emperor Jing looked at Changde beside him and slowly said, "Summon the 2 prime ministers, the head of the secretariat, the attendant, and the 6 ministers to the palace." Changde stood with his hands by his side and respectfully said, "This old servant obeys." The 2 prime ministers, the head of the secretariat, the attendant, and the 6 ministers. Every one of them was a high-ranking official who could shake the court with a stamp of their feet. When the emperor summoned 1 or 2 of them alone, no one would think too much. However, when the emperor summoned all of them to the palace at the same time, no one would believe that it wasn't an important matter. The emperor was seriously ill, and the great court conference was approaching. At this delicate moment, there was only one thing that could be called an important matter: the position of crown prince. For a moment, the atmosphere of the entire capital became tense. This was especially so for the princes who had already arrived in the capital. Their hearts were in their throats. All of their fates might change today. Countless gazes were focused on the palace gate. The 10 officials of the imperial court only came out of the palace at night. However, after leaving the palace, each of them directly returned to their residences in their carriages and closed the doors, refusing to meet any guests. Regardless of whether it was the princes or the high-ranking officials in the capital, they refused to meet any of them. Other than his family, the person he was the most willing to get close to was Shanning. Perhaps it was because the proud Lolita had been with him for the longest period of time. The closeness he felt toward Shanning was far greater than that of others. Yongming did not need to return for the next few days. After all, she had not fully recovered from her illness, and would need to undergo psychological treatment from time to time. During this period of time, she did not need to stay in the palace. After coaxing the 2 little fellows to sleep, Li still did not feel sleepy at all. The courtyard was a little cold, but he did not mind it at all as he lay on the chair. The sky was pitch black with no stars. The night was exceptionally quiet. Many things had happened recently. It had only been a few days, but the eldest princess was no longer the eldest princess. Li Xian was also going to become the emperor. His original plans had been completely disrupted. For a few moments, he started to feel lost about the path he was going to take in the future. Chapter 949. It was already the 20th of the 12th lunar month. In another 10 days, it would officially enter the 5th year of Jinghe. Many high-ranking officials and dignitaries in the capital had already begun to busy themselves with the New Year's festival. The common people were naturally busy as well. While they were busy, they couldn't help but feel a little worried. The weather seemed to be colder than in previous years, but there was no snow in the capital this year. Not only the capital, but there was no snow in the 13 states of the Gyeonggi region. For experienced farmers, they naturally knew what this meant. If it didn't snow this winter, the harvest next year would not be optimistic. Ruoqing's body had recovered. During the new year, the business of the brothel became more and more busy, but Zue Mo kept a close eye on her and didn't allow her to manage those things. She was gentle, so she naturally couldn't dissuade Zue Mo. The 2 of them just went out to buy some New Year's goods. Sometimes it was 3 people, and Li Yi played the role of carrying the bags. It was a happy thing to carry the bags for his woman. These things didn't need servants or guards to do for him. According to his original plan, this year's reunion night should be spent with the family. However, Zue Mo's wedding dress had not been finished for a long time, and there was no good time to tell Ruoqing. The imperial court meeting was approaching. It was not difficult to imagine that the whole capital would directly explode at that time. Li Yi himself didn't know how many things he had to do. He couldn't choose to do things with them at such a hasty time. After walking half a street, he had already carried a lot of things in his hands. Zue Mo and Ruoqing walked in front, and he and Su walked behind. Ever since he started hanging out with second great-uncle, Li Yi realized that elder Su had started to become neurotic. He was already so old, but he was slowly turning into a masochist. His tendency to be a masochist was very serious. Every time he was abused, he would quietly find a place to sit, and his mind would wander off. In recent days, his realm had improved again, and he didn't need to find a quiet place to wander. After Little Red entered the door, Fong no longer needed to go to the Jade Courtyard, so naturally he didn't need to follow her. Su's head was like a block of wood. Li Yi was bored by himself, so he went over and looked at the things they bought. He asked curiously, "Didn't you buy these things 2 days ago? Why are you buying them again?" "This is for Mrs. Chun." Drunk Emo looked at him grumpily and said, "Mrs. Chun is usually so good to us. It's almost the new year, so we naturally have to buy some gifts to send over." Li Yi smiled and said, "In a family, the man takes care of the outside and the woman takes care of the inside. I know you will think of these things. Whose family with you?" Drunk Ink glanced at her and took Ruoqing's hand, saying, "Let's go to that shop and have a look." Ruoqing looked at her and smiled, and was immediately pulled away by Zue Mo. Li realized that ever since she had let go of the knot in her heart and said those words, some things had changed. For example, she had started to be on the same side as Ruoqing, making him seem like an outsider. He wouldn't lower himself to her level now, but after she married into the family he would deal with her properly. As for what she had just said, he naturally wouldn't ignore it. Although the Chun family had been confiscated, their property confiscated, and their servants chased away, it wasn't as if nothing had been left behind. Chun Chong and the Chun brothers now ran a cloth shop. It wasn't big, but it was more than enough to support a family. Of course, as the only designated supplier for the ready-made clothing shop in the capital, they didn't have to worry about business at all. Chun Chong didn't accept his gift, but he didn't reject it. What a hypocritical fellow. It wasn't easy to run a shop in the capital, especially for a family like the Chun family that had once been glorious and then quickly declined. Former friends might not still be friends, and former enemies would definitely still be enemies. These days, the people he had arranged in the open and in the shadows had already helped them clear up countless troubles. Seeing Zue Mo and Ruoqing enter a shop, he quickly followed. Chun Cloth Shop. This was a newly opened cloth shop in the capital. Its name was Ordinary, but the people who opened it were not ordinary at all. Once the House of Duke, the Chun family had 2 sons. One was a minister, and the other was a third-rank attendant. They had countless friends, and had unparalleled influence in the capital. They were the people that most of the common people, and even the nobles looked up to. But that was then, and this was now. The present Chun family was just a commoner's family, no different from the majority of the people in the capital. The common people often talked about the prosperous poor, but they loved to see the nobles in distress even more. Every day, many people would come here, not to buy cloth, but to see what the once glorious Chun family had fallen to. After Chun Chong entered the shop, he waved his hand and said, "Li Jun, these rolls of cloth were ordered by a customer yesterday. They will be coming to collect them soon. Move them over there." Yes. Chun Li Jun, who had once been one of the capital's greatest profligates, was now wearing extremely ordinary clothes. Hearing this, he immediately ran over, strenuously picked up the rolls of cloth, and placed them on the other side of the shop. Chun Chong lifted a curtain and walked into a small room inside. Frowning, he said, "Miao Yu, didn't I tell you to rest at home? Why are you here again?" Chapter 950. You're here to deliberately cause trouble? Even ordinary cloth could not be torn apart so easily. Chun Li-jun was very familiar with his family's cloth. A person who could tear through this cloth like it was paper was definitely not an ordinary person. He was not a customer. The scene before him was his ultimate goal. The young man stepped on the cloth and lightly said, "You claim that your family's cloth is the sturdiest in the entire capital. Who would have thought that it would be torn with just a light tear? I'm afraid the cloth sold in this shop is only of inferior quality, right?" The curtain in the inner room was lifted open, and Chin Chong walked out. His gaze swept across the interior of the shop and looked at the young man. Calmly he asked, "Who sent you?" Before this shop had opened, he had already predicted many things. When the Chun family was at its peak, it had many families and vassals that it was on good terms with, but it also had many enemies. After the Chun family fell into decline, the small families that had been its vassals naturally looked for other big families. Some of the families that it was on good terms with were exiled, some were still in prison, and the rest avoided the Chun family like the plague. Of course, there were also many people who were happy to see the Chun family in its current state. As they walked by, they would throw a few stones and spit a few times. At this time, asking the two sides what their grievances were, and why they had come to cause trouble was a very childish thing to do. Thus he did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. "You're the shopkeeper of this shop?" The young man looked at him, shook his head and said, "I don't understand what you mean. Your family uses these rags to deceive the customers, but you don't want to talk about it and say something I don't understand. What do you mean?" The cloth shop was located in a busy market. With the new year approaching, there was an endless stream of customers. This was the time when business was at its peak. In a short time, there were many more customers outside the shop. "What's wrong with these cloth?" A gentle voice came from behind. Third Miss Chen opened the curtain and saw the situation inside the shop. She quickly walked out, bent down and picked up the cloth on the ground. "Put it down. Do you still want to destroy the evidence?" The young man reached out and grabbed the cloth. With a sudden tug, he snatched it from her hands. Because he had used too much strength, she lost her balance and fell to the side. "Miaoyu." Chun Chong's expression changed. He immediately rushed over and helped her up, asking with concern, "Miaoyu, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Chun Miaoyu waved her hand, and Chun Chong's sharp senses noticed a few traces of blood seeping out of her palm. Chun Miaoyu noticed the change in his expression and shook her head, saying, "It's just a scratch, it's not a big deal." Chun Chong looked at Third Miss Chun and said with concern, "Miaoyu, I'll take you to the infirmary to bandage your wounds." Only now did Li Yi see the blood seeping out of Third Miss Chen's hand. He turned and waved his hand, saying, "Forget it, there's no need to ask." He then turned to the slovenly elder and said, "Sue, I'll have to trouble you to ask him yourself." The slovenly elder nodded expressionlessly and walked up to the young man. The young man was about to speak when the old man casually sealed his acupoint with a finger and said, "Don't speak. Close your eyes and feel it well." As soon as he finished speaking, the young man fell to the ground. Then his expression became extremely ferocious, but he couldn't make any sound. The veins on his forehead bulged, and the veins on his neck wriggled like earthworms. The faces of the three people beside him turned pale, and their bodies trembled. "There's clean gauze and medicine in the stall next door. I'll go get it." Wan Ruoqing put down the things in her hands and walked out quickly after saying this. Third Miss Chun smiled and said, "It's just a superficial wound. There's no need to go through so much trouble." "I'll use it. I'll use it." Li Yi and Chun Chong spoke at the same time. The two looked at each other, and then turned their heads at the same time. Ruoqing returned very quickly. Together with Zue Mo, she took Third Miss Chun inside to treat the wound. On the ground, the acupoints on the young man's body had been unsealed, and the veins had all subsided. However, his body was still twitching unconsciously. The burly man squatted down and looked at him with some pity. He advised, "Brother, I suggest you tell us who sent you here. That was just the appetizer. If you still don't tell us." The young man's body was still twitching, as if he could no longer hear what he was saying. The burly man patted his face and asked, Brother, are you all right? Only when his hand hurt from the patting did he shake his head and stand up. Looking at the three people, he asked, "If he doesn't tell us, will you guys tell us?" Plop. The three people knelt on the ground at the same time and said in horror, "We don't know. We really don't know. We just received money to do the job. We don't know anything else." Chen Chong shook his head and said, "Just like the previous times, they also don't know who's behind them." "You don't understand." Li shook his head and said, "The people behind them usually won't be satisfied with just hearing. They want to see the results with their own eyes. Maybe he's hiding somewhere and secretly watching." Chen Chong looked at him and asked, "How do you know?" "I guessed." Li walked over, looked at the three people and asked, "You don't know who he is, but you definitely know where he is, right?" One of them had a face full of horror. "We really?" Li looked behind him. "Sue, I might have to trouble you again." "We know." The man looked at Li and said sincerely, "We really know." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.